And it had gone all the way up to Jamie Dimon that Plaid was kind of doing that.
This is seed stage.
We were really worried about Venmo. It's disaggregating the relationship that we have with our banking customers. JP Morgan, internally, we're like, oh, we've shut down Plaid. They don't work. But this is while I was also interviewing at Plaid. I remember I linked up my bank account to Venmo. And I was like, Plaid still works. They're like, don't worry. If you do join, we will tell you how.
Welcome to the Peel. I'm your host, Churned founder of Nana Capital. I'm excited for this conversation with Charley Ma and Mahdi Raza, founders of Pathlight Ventures, and more importantly, early employees at 5 unicorns, including Plaid, Ramp, Alloy, Robinhood, and Stytch.
Nearly all the companies we helped to build were not popular at the seed round. Or probably not even popular at the Series A round.
And all my VC friends were, no, we passed on that company. There's all these red flags.
We talk about the best first startup job if you're not an engineer.
If you want to have a great career doing business things in a startup, go be an SDR.
Meeting when Charley sold Plaid to Robinhood.
The funny thing is Robinhood, we churned off of Plaid.
Yep. Yeah, that was tough.
But the important thing is we came back. And
How'd you win them back?
Uh,
How Ramp got its very first customers.
The first meeting that I had with Eric and Kareem, I remember feeling this is the closest thing I felt to actually meeting the early Plaid team.
Angel investing together and how that led to starting Pathlight.
We find large funds get in the way of large outcomes for their portfolio companies.
Why hitting $1 million in ARR doesn't necessarily mean you have product market fit.
Map out the entire value chain of jobs to be done. And are you building the most high value thing for them?
And how they raised their $75 million Fund 2 in the bear market of 2023.
It's the most referenced I've ever been in my life.
I publish new episodes every week exploring the world's greatest startup stories. Subscribe and check the link in the show notes to make sure you never miss an episode. Let's talk to Charley and Mahdi.
Oh, now?
No. Sorry. I'll start in a second. I'm giving it like a couple seconds to just, All right.
This is my first podcast, so maybe first and last, so got to make it good.
Charley, Mahdi, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us. Excited to be here.
I think this will be fun. This is Mahdi's first podcast ever. So
maybe first and last. We'll see how it goes.
We'll see. Here we go.
Well, you guys have a really interesting shared commonality between the both of you, aside from working together every day. You both grew up in basements. Mahdi, what's the story there?
Parents immigrated in late 80s, and my dad was a captor, so we never had that much money, and turns out basement is much cheaper than other parts of the building.
Than the penthouse hotel.
Yeah, you got to start off on the -1 floor and then slowly make your way up.
Yeah, windows and daylight are expensive. That's a real premium. So
did you guys have AC? Or
we had AC, but it's actually probably during the winters the heating gets dicey a little bit. But yeah, so grew up there and then slowly clawed our way up. I was fortunate where growing up in New York was mostly great. You have free healthcare, education if you're low income. I was fortunate enough to go to Stuyvesant, which opened up the aperture of opportunity for me. And
that's a high school here in New York, right?
Yeah, it's a high school with a lot of great founders and VCs who have come out of there over the course of the years. And I think was my first time being around folks who were kind of similar to me of being hungry, smart, and had a drive to succeed and had grown up in similar circumstances. And then there were also role models over the years, many alumni who had gone on to do great things, some in venture, some in starting companies. And so you finally had, in some ways, folks to look up to or aspire to. So that was super impactful for me and kind of getting me to here.
Yeah, and you did too, right?
Similar, yeah. I was on the other coast. So I grew up in San Francisco, so we didn't really need AC, which was nice. But similarly, I think my parents immigrated from China, late 1980s, kind of fleeing the communist revolution there. Came to the U.S. and they like to joke that everything that I do, nothing was as hard as what they had to do, which I 100% agree with. Yeah. So constantly disappointing them, but hopefully making progress on that day by day is the running joke in the family. But no, I think that kind of growing up in both mine, I think shared a lot of that kind of similar backgrounds of growing up with, I think, a high value of what does money actually mean, right? And I think very grateful to our parents to give us the platform to do what we do today.
Yeah, and you also had similar experiences in terms of you both had a couple different roles at pretty important companies. I know you both played, like important roles at those companies as well. Interested to kind of talk through those. Maybe Charley, go first. Like, what was your kind of first? I think maybe even before that very first startup role. But
I'll give the actual sort of more in-depth story, I think, of how I kind of entered into startups. So I grew up in the Bay Area, ended up going to school on the East Coast. I went to Penn for undergrad, and there's a whole other long story there. I thought I wanted to go do research and study science, and I had a bunch of research grants and scholarships there. And then I joke that kind of going into an East Coast school, I remember my freshman year, a bunch of my roommates were like, I want to go to banking and consulting. And I was like, what the heck is that? You can get a job after college? Like, that sounds crazy.
Instead of going to more school.
Yeah, instead of going to more school. I think I was raised with, if you want to go into business, you get an MBA. You're going to be a doctor, a lawyer. You're going to get a graduate degree, right? Yep. That's why we came to the United States. That's why we care about your education, and that's what we're going to do.
Yep.
But I think that was really eye-opening of, oh, cool, you can get a job. And so junior year, ended up going undeclared. I originally was studying biophysics, went undeclared, ended up studying econ because it was candidly the only thing I could graduate on time with from the school and not burn more tuition money.
That's important when the immigrant parents are probably not funding much.
Very important. Ended up getting a job at JP Morgan here in New York. Interned there, then got a full-time job there. But it wasn't banking. It was sort of this like mid-office, back-office role. Treasury and Security Services, TSS. Shout out to anyone that worked at Legacy TSS JP Morgan. It's basically the rest of the bank that did treasury services, security services. It's working with Fortune 500, but on their kind of day-to-day transactional needs, right? Okay. And so I ended up joining JP Morgan full-time. But at some point I was interested in startups and technology. And I was like, oh, that seems pretty cool and interesting. And so my one interesting break was I actually interned between my senior year. So I graduated in May. And in September, I was going to move to New York full-time to start at JP Morgan. Intern for this company called Ampush. So Jesse Pooji, who's a Penn alum. Yep. I'm big on Twitter, and a shout out to Jesse.
Yeah. That guy's he's an animal.
Yeah, Jesse's amazing. So Jesse hired me as an intern when Ampush was just starting to kind of figure out this sort of social media advertising business. And that was the first time I think I ever worked in San Francisco, worked for at that time it was a bootstrap startup.
Okay.
And I remember being, the amount of impact I have on this company as an intern was way more than anything that I would be doing at JP Morgan as sort of a cog in the wheel there. And so that was got me interested and opened the aperture of, I think the startup tech thing is interesting. I joined the closest thing that I thought would be a startup JP Morgan, which I joined this R&D team that was trying to build new technologies within the firm. The keyword there is try. Built a lot of decks. Nice. Built a lot of decks and tried to build some product and ship some stuff there. But I got really interested in sort of payments. And at the time that was blockchain, APIs, AI and sanction screening. I think it was a little bit ahead of the curve for JP Morgan at the time. We were just moving to the cloud. Okay. And that was the crazy thing to do. And then throughout that time, I was also trying to break into startups. So I was applying to a bunch of startups in New York. I was like, VC, that sounds interesting. Was applying to a bunch of VC roles. Got rejected from pretty much anything.
Why do you think you got rejected?
I think... One, I didn't know anything about anything, right? I knew nothing about actually building a business. I knew nothing about how startup financing work. I had an intern at Ampush and knew a little bit about advertising, right? But I knew nothing else about anything, right?
Were you pretending that you knew, or
I don't know. I think I was pretty directive. I don't know anything. Okay. In retrospect, probably wasn't the best approach. And I was also, I think, I was going through the typical process of apply online. You go through a recruiter, which probably doesn't really get you a whole lot of ways,
so
right?
Do you recommend that route, or would you do differently?
No, I would say by far the best way to get into any company is getting referral in, right? So figuring out a way to network in, referral in is definitely always the best, or just sending a very thoughtful cold email, right? I think I've actually found that to work surprisingly well, right? Where I tell this to applicants all the time. The vast majority of applicants don't actually spend time, like the amount of alpha you can get on sending a very thoughtful email to a hiring manager, to a founder of a company that you're interested, excited about. Like if someone sends me an email and they've done a bunch of research on my background, they've done a bunch of research on the work that I do, and they're actually genuinely interesting, and I think they're interested, I will spend 30 minutes, an hour of talking to them, right? It's worth the, hey, looks like you spent some time doing research into me. I will go do that. I did not do that at the time. But my one big lucky break was one of the companies I thought was interesting was this company Plaid that was building APIs and financial data. And that was one of the things I was interested in JP Morgan was, can we do that internally there? And
so you kind of had like an edge on that job. So like you kind of understood somewhat.
A little bit. Yeah, definitely. I think I had a bit of an edge on understanding what payments were. I was this weird, like 21-year-old analyst that was, interested in payments. And that was kind of weird, I think, at the bank, and probably weird for Zach and William, our founders at Plaid. And yeah, when I applied, I did apply with, I applied via API, via the website.
You applied via an API?
Yeah, so, Plaid, for a very long time, the only way to apply was via API.
Okay. You had to like write a code to like push it?
It was spun up Postman, set up a quick kind of post request to the API endpoint, but I had to learn what all that meant. So I asked a bunch of engineering friends of how the heck do I apply to this company? I think it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So
that's a cool
figured that out. Yeah. I think it still might be there. I think they might have gotten rid of it, but for the longest time, that was the only way you could apply to Plaid. It was the API developer first company. So I applied, and I think Zach reached out and was, this is kind of weird. You like kind of know what we do. I wrote a little like one pager on why I was actually interested genuinely about the company, and here's the landscape of how I think about APIs and payments. And then they took a shot at me and ended up joining Plaid very early on. I was one of the first business hires there.
Amazing. What would you recommend back to Charley, like going back? What do you think you did right, did wrong? Like what would you just tell yourself that first day or before you started?
That's a good question.
Because I saw I think you might have commented this on Twitter.
I did just yesterday. Our friend Ben Braverman wrote a tweet on, I think one of the recommendations that he gives, which I think I very much agree with a lot of the founders we talk to, is there is actually often hiring kind of, he called ex-consultant, ex-bankers, and I was like, I fell in the maybe third bucket, but, ex-generalist, right, that's like relatively pretty smart, right, and hungry and willing to grind and work, and just shadowing the founder as the founder transitions from founder sales to a bit more of an actual go-to-market process. Honestly, I would probably do what I did, which was the first 2-3 months of the job, I was just trying not to get fired. I didn't know anything. I'd gotten this job and I was like, okay, cool. Like going to move back to San Francisco. And see how this goes. I remember at the time I was like, I'm interested in the cool, sexy roles. It'd be like product or strategy. That's what people tell you to go into, right? And then turns out it's like, nope, you're a BDR salesperson, right? Like the only thing that matters is we have this entire pipeline of customers that we haven't really talked to, right? And my job was to go talk to the customers. I remember the second day, I think Zach came back to me and was like, okay, great. Here, the first day, let me talked about Plaid, shouted me on some calls. The second day is, okay, go call these people. And I was like, what do you mean? go call these people? It's like, no, go talk to them. They're interested. Like your job is to get them onto Plaid.
And what were you like? 22, 3, 4.
Yeah, 24 years old, I think at the time. I had never sold anything in my life. I'd barely talked to clients and customers at JP Morgan. Like I was always an analyst building PowerPoint decks, right?
Yeah.
Which is why I understand, I think people that maybe gone through banking consulting that have more of that client-facing experience, like that's definitely like really, really impactful. Like I knew none of that. But I spent the first 2 months of the job, I think just like shadowing Zach and just literally transcribing everything that he would say. I had this like 7-page document of like, here's the question that the prospective customer was asked, and here's all the different permutations of how our founder answered that, right?
And then you would synthesize. And when you're talking, you're like, how do I just pick the right thing from this playbook.
Yep. But then over time, it turns out, that's actually like building a playbook, right? Yep. That's building your discovery questions. That's building your qualification questions. At the time, I had no clue that's what we were doing. I was just trying to kind of build a script and not sound like an idiot and not just like screw up, potentially a big potential customer. But over time, that ended up being like super impactful, right? Of just being able to shadow your founder or founders and just help them on follow-ups, help them documentation, updating the CRM, like all that stuff that, it's sort of a mix of like a glorified EA plus sales rep, I would say. But that was also a great learning experience for me.
Yeah, question for both of you before we go a little bit deeper on some of that stuff. Like, what do you think makes a good early startup employee? Like, if I'm listening to this and I'm the Charley, I'm 23, I'm making decks, I want my strategy internship or strategy role, what would you say this is actually what matters and what you should do?
I think the journey to kind of roundabout get to your question is oftentimes you have a puzzle, which hopefully will become a company. And you are, as an early employee, trying to figure out the right pieces of that puzzle to put together that flesh out the full picture. What's usually missing for most folks is context. Once you have the context and you have the ability to kind of think through the different options you have, whether it's on the business side, which is oftentimes sales, product, or engineering, putting that all together and kind of just grinding it out in a customer and team-oriented way is can take you really, really far. And so it's kind of having that alignment between, in the early days, you're just looking to survive, which means find product market fit. And then as an employee, that is the main thing and really the only thing every single minute of every single day.
Yeah. And then the other thing I think we distilled down to it's quite simple, right? It's you're making something, right? Or you're selling something, right? In the B2B context, or you're making money off the thing that you sell, right? I think the number of people that have asked both of us, if I want to go do strategy at an early stage startup, and my usual response is like, what the hell does that even mean, right? Like, no, there's not one person that does strategy at the company, right? Maybe the founder, but no one's, you don't create a startup in slides constantly, right? It's at the end of the day, it's you talk to customers, you have to actually build something, you actually have to sell something, you have to create partnerships, you have to figure out how to orchestrate all these people to go towards one single purpose, right? Which is actually building something that makes money, right? And so like one of I think we talked to a lot of early people that want to be early business hires at, promising B2B companies. And a lot of them will come from like more prestigious backgrounds, right? Maybe they went to like an Ivy League, or they came from banking or consulting or whatnot, right? Or maybe ex-MBAs, et cetera. And my advice is always like, hey, I think if you want to have a great break and a great career doing business things in a startup, like go be an SDR. I think that's by far like the easiest way to learn how to actually sell something.
And SDR is sales.
Sales development. Like entry level salesperson, right? Your job is probably cold calling, cold outbound, getting in front of people.
Yeah, we call it smile and dial.
Yeah. Smile and dial roles. Our job in Venture, which we'll probably talk about a bit, we are glorified SDRs, right? Our job is to try to get in front of founders in any way possible that we can, right? We are more than happy to cold email, cold call, do whatever possible to get in front of the founders.
Show up at conferences,
do podcasts, your first
podcast, exactly.
And we'll chat about later, but we think of the fund as a startup, and so we have to approach the go-to-market on the founder side in the same way as we would have for any other company.
Yeah. So if you're not I wish I was amazing at engineering and could build things. I am not a great engineer. I don't think I ever would have been. And so on the business side, it's cool. I think that the alpha there is learning how to convince people to buy, sell, use your product.
Yeah. Maybe one framework we think about it is oftentimes we're looking at what is the world of what this company can be. And those kind of crucial moments. And then most of the time, probably 95% of the time, you're thinking through tactically, what are the next 5 days, month, 3 months of all the things we need to do to make that vision a reality. And then very occasionally, you'll have those journeys where you're oscillating between the vision and the day-to-day, which is where that strategy comes into play sometimes. But in the early days, survival and Maslow's hierarchy of needs is the core priority every single minute.
Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit more some of the other companies that you joined, but I want to ask the question, like, as a founder, how do you convince, or what should you be looking for and who you're hiring? It's like a multifaceted.
I was just saying, I feel like you have you had a really good, thoughtful approach around how you joined Robinhood early on.
You went from the basement, no AC, to working at Robinhood. What was that like? And then how did you make that decision when you get to that point?
Yeah, I mean, it was really, I would say, the critical milestones in my journey were basement to Stuyvesant. Stuyvesant to got a full ride for college. So was fortunate enough to go to NYU, and then started my career out in M&A with Evercore. Spent most of my time working with large regulated institutions on the healthcare side, on the financial institutions and fintech side. And the partner that led our team, partners were terrific. I was to Charlie's earlier point, a 22-year-old who, frankly, had never talked to anyone with that much gray hair besides my teachers or professors. And now you have to talk to them in a professional context of how to either sell their company, acquire a new company, or fend off an activist, and somehow sound much more mature than the 22-year-old.
Like a Macy's old suit, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't fit. Yeah.
And was that actually you? Macy's old suit?
Macy's old suit, where Evercore is a great institution led by terrific folks. The running joke in my analyst class was I wore clothes that were a few sizes too big for me that looked like they came off the rack the night before, and all of that was also true. Okay. They did come off the rack the night before on a discount. Easter,
that's important.
Yeah, Easter and Labor Day sales go a long way for young banking analysts.
Interesting.
Good
pro tip.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the VP I worked for, I was a little bit skinnier then, so we joked we were the lightest deal team because we were so thin. And then over the years, added a lot of pounds.
Bulked up muscle, right?
Just from a lot of ordering DoorDash, or very large early DoorDash customers.
Oh, yeah.
Just overnight ordering too many desserts. And so, coming out of the basement effectively, I've never had a free budget for food, so
that's actually huge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it just went a little crazy for some period of time on sugar.
Yeah.
But joined Evercore, and Evercore was terrific. We worked somewhat stupidly hard, but learned a ton in a lot of different contexts, different types of businesses, from early stage companies all the way to $50+ billion public companies on any range of companies. Types of companies, management teams. You got to see what good looks like, also what really bad looks like. And from there, I ended up joining one of our clients at JC as a member of the investment team in New York, JC being the Singaporean sovereign wealth fund, and helping build out their investment practice for the U.S.
The which sovereign wealth fund?
Singaporean.
Oh, Singapore. Okay.
And we continue to spend a lot of time in fintech, both in the U.S. And Asia and Europe. And then from there, I had a really simple idea, which we had seen work well in Asia. One of the last investments I worked on was Ant Financial, the dominant fintech and financial services firm in China that was instrumental in helping lift hundreds of millions of folks from lower income to the middle class in China and broader Asia.
And the product was basically just like bank accounts, more accessible, a little bit of lending.
So initially, actually started from a very high engagement initial product, which was going through the merchants to drive payments acceptance, and then moving into higher margin financial services products from asset management, mutual funds, insurance products. And the idea of a super app, which is still TBD even today, was quite real. Can you recreate this in the U.S. in Western economies? And my perspective was, on a personal level, I now felt comfortable increasing the aperture from a career basis to take a risk. My goal since I was quite young was to save enough money to get my parents' house so they could stop living in the basement or moving apartment to apartment as we were renting. And so was able to do that on a personal basis And then on the professional side, saw this opportunity to try to recreate what I consider to be one of the best and most impactful technology businesses in North America. And there were two, in my mind, options where you could do this. In the US, Cash App, which is part of Square, was a terrific product and continues to be a terrific product. And then Robinhood was still quite early in its time, where they truly transformed commissions to no commissions. Yep. And created sometimes a little too high engagement consumer investing product. Yep. And the hope was to turn Robinhood into a full suite of financial services. And so that was a clear opportunity with a great early team to help build, grow, and scale that into what we hope is going to be one of the largest drivers of consumer financial wealth in the US.
Yeah, I think I saw they have 8 products now that are doing over 100 million in revenue or something like that. Kind of insane. Like, there's probably only a couple other companies that do that.
Yeah, and the root of that is consumer products are really hard, as you know. But the root needs to be a high engagement, obvious financial services product that has dynamic distribution, where you can drive what feels like a natural motion of upsell into additional financial services products, from things that are exciting to things that are quite boring. And Robinhood, on the investing side, what I would say was a phenomenon of turning that from something very stale and old into something that is quite social, that people do talk about more often, which is there's personal finances. And that was partially a trend in millennials. And so transforming that, Cash App obviously transformed peer-to-peer payments and really took innovation to the next level. And so I continue to be both grateful for the opportunity with Robinhood and enthusiastic about what they will continue to drive on the innovation side.
Yeah, I know you guys have thoughts on this. Is it good to join a early stage company, or should you join like a Series D, Series E? How do you guys kind of think about that?
Yeah, no, I think we get asked this a lot. I think my honest take is I probably would not recommend joining as I'll take away engineering. I think engineering is a kind of separate category. Most people we usually talk to are sort of early business people, right? I think at early engineering, generally speaking, you're getting quite a bit more equity. The sort of trade-off that you make from a comp equity perspective, like, might make it the math, I think, a little bit more interesting. I think when it comes to being an early business hire, more often than not, like, you're not getting actually that much equity in the company, right?
And your salaries also.
And your salary is also, you're taking a big pay cut in the salary, right? So you're getting the worst of, all the worlds there, right?
So it sounds like a pretty shitty offer. Like,
usually, yes, most of those offers are pretty shitty, right? And risk reward, you're usually, I think, way better off joining a Series B, product market fit, well-funded, brand name, quote unquote, high density company. Right. There's a lot of reasons for that. One, you'll get obviously momentum begets momentum, right? And if the company does a true product market fit and it's truly in hyper growth mode, right? The reason why I think, want to join startups is, I think, one of the reasons why I was excited about was I wanted to figure out how to hypercharge my career, right? I think when you're typically in maybe like a banking or consulting or other paths, right? It's very almost like linear to a certain extent of, hey, you do 2 years here, 3 years here, you go from analyst, associate, VP, etc., right? And it's very rare, it happens, but very rare that you can kind of leapfrog that, right?
And you can, if things go well, the idea of a startup is you can go from a couple of folks in the garage to 1,000 people. And
pretty quick, yeah.
And potentially pretty quick, and compress, on a personal basis, your career, if you're able to scale. And if the founders empower you to grow in responsibility accordingly. And so it's one of the biggest upsides and reasons a lot of folks go to startups, including us at different points.
Yeah. So the number one recommendation that we give is the most important thing that really matters is joining a company and a startup that is growing, right?
So that's even more important than what I'm getting paid.
Yes.
or what my equity is.
To a certain extent, yeah. I would say if you really want to go early, there's a couple of things. I think if you really want to go early, right, you should care about there's some momentum or growth around the company, right? I actually would argue that if you're joining a Series B, Series C company, they can actually pay market rates, right? Especially if they're well-funded, they have cash on balance sheet. You don't have to take, it depends on how much money you're making, right?
Yeah.
But they're not paying egregiously low salaries, right? Usually there's a market rate. Your equity may be not impactful, right? But it will be probably somewhat meaningful because it'll probably be, if the company actually exits, like it'll actually make money off that, right? You won't retire off of it by any means, right? But you'll get a great experience. You make good money, right? Not amazing money, but good money. You won't have to take massive pay cuts. And the most important thing, I think, is the learning experience. Learning experience and the people that you surround yourself with, right? Where the things that we believe really compounds is your people and the network that you work with, right? Like that's where you're going to find the next company to join. You're going to find your potential co-founders. You're going to find potential people to invest alongside with. And the most important things to drive that are high potential, just like really hardworking, smart driven people, right? Combine that with at a company that is, growing well and efficiently, and you're learning the right best practices on how to build a hyper growth company. The other thing that we talk about is that we recommend most companies should not actually get venture funding, right? Venture funding is probably the number one way to kill your company, right?
Wow, okay.
Most companies should not be venture backed.
We got to cut this part. This is bad news for all of us.
We talk to founders all the time, right? Of like, I'd much rather, if I were to start a company, I'd probably actually want to start a bootstrap company where I own 100% of the equity, right? I control all the decisions. There's no other party I have to be beholden to. And I control the destiny on how fast I need to grow, right? The moment that you raise venture capital money, you have to be on a hyper growth trajectory, right?
Yep.
It's not interesting if you're growing double digit, year over year as an early stage company. That's not interesting, right? Any other businesses, that'd be an amazing business, right? But for venture, that's just not how it works. So as a result, like the best companies are those that truly enter hypergrowth trajectory, and that's where you actually learn the skill sets, I think, to build a hypergrowth company. And you work with, hopefully the best people to do that. And so that could be, joining. There's a lot of people. I remember there were friends that would come to me and like, well, I'm thinking about joining Stripe. It's worth $1 billion. It's at $1 billion valuation. That seems, too expensive right now, right? Obviously now they all did fine, right?
Yeah,
Stripe's continued to do great business. That equity, has grown in multiples, right? And that was also a great time to join. It just turned out Stripe was continuing to kind of grow in this hyper growth trajectory, right? And continue to get great a high density of talent. On the flip side, I think joining early, if you are doing that, right, I think you have to be very particular and very specific as to why. Candidly, for me, I was fortunate to join early because I couldn't get into anywhere else. I think I tried applying to a lot of the more name brand companies in New York. At the time, was a lot of ad tech companies.
Because the advertising background.
Yes, it was advertising background. I think it was a very hot space at the time across the New York City ecosystem in sort of 2010s or so.
And Plaid was not sexy at the time, right?
No, Plaid was not a very popular company amongst VCs. I remember the other
fintech itself was not popular.
Yes,
it was barely even a category.
No, I remember. Right? I remember I got an offer from Plaid, and I talked to the few VC friends that I knew, and all my VC friends were, no, we passed on that company. I was like, what are the reasons why, right? I remember being, well, we think the TAM is really small. Like, they're selling to fintech. What the heck is fintech? It's not a big enough addressable market. First-time founders. There's this like lawsuit on the horizon. They'd just gone sued by Yodlee, which was a public company that was a competitor to Plaid in the space on patent infringement. There's all these red flags on just stay away from that company. And on my side, I was like, well, it's the only offer that I have, to be honest. So
And you thought it was a good idea.
I thought it was a good idea, but I remember I actually didn't want to move back to San Francisco. I really wanted to stay in New York. I liked New York, but it was the only offer that I had. I was excited about it, and I was really excited about Zach and William, the founders. I think they had really strong perspective on where they were going to take the company, and that was a big reason I joined. And then candidly, the other side was, if it fails, I can always go back to JP Morgan. My old boss there was, I don't know why you're joining this startup, but whenever it fails, you can come back and work for us, right?
Good soft landing, I guess.
Yeah. And so I was able to open up the risk aperture there, but it was also kind of quote unquote safe in a weird way.
I was going to say, like, for anyone that is thinking about joining a startup, context is usually what I would encourage folks to try to get first. Context across people, across what's truly interesting, and what greatness looks like. What greatness looks like, that influences just what your bar is in the future.
Yeah.
Across people allows you to, it doesn't need to be your forever home, but allows you to find options down the line that are really interesting that would not be obvious on day zero. And then allows you to have a real appreciation for what could drive what a terrific product looks like. And so going to something that's already showing signs of working as the first stop is what I would strongly encourage. For instance, with Robinhood, we were fortunate where by the time I joined, the product was already had. The downside was we had multiple days where no one could use the product at different points in time.
Because the outages?
The outages, the app always had downtime, but people always came back. For better or worse. And so there was already a sign of, hey, this is something in a really large market, really talented people, maybe a little bit unorthodox out in Palo Alto. But there are signs that there's something really clicking here, and it would be maybe the first of its kind. And so that momentum turned to even more momentum over the years as we kind of scaled 100x across people, revenue, kind of everything.
Yeah, I would agree on the context part. I remember I would say two things. One thing that got me excited about Plaid and also ended up being I think why I got hired and why Zach and the team took a chance on me was I remember at JP Morgan, one of our biggest concerns was data leakage, right? Of like, hey, all these companies are coming in and taking our data and they're enabling these fintech companies and we know we would like that, right? And it gone all the way up to Jamie Dimon that, this company Plaid was kind of doing that,
Wow,
right?
this is seed stage.
This seed stage, yeah.
Before you joined.
Yes, and I was like, oh, that's how Plaid came on the radar. I was like, oh, that's interesting. This is like this tiny company. I made a slide about Plaid to present to our executive committee on this is what we think they're doing, right? And I remember the big thread at the time was we were really worried about Venmo, right? Of, hey, Venmo is building this P2P wallet. It's disaggregating the relationship that we have with our banking customers, right? Should we, at JP Morgan Chase, should we launch our own wallet? And there's a whole long history of failed attempts. And they've gotten better at it. And I guess now you have Zelle, right? And argue around that. But, whole other topic there. But, right, Venmo was this thing that we're seeing a lot of traction. And the way that people were connecting their bank accounts to Venmo was from Plaid. Right. But I remember we presented, then, JP Morgan internally were like, oh, we've shut down Plaid. Like Plaid and Venmo, they don't work. We figured out how to shut it all down, what they're doing. But this is what I was also interviewing at Plaid. I remember talking to them and I was like, no, I've like, and this is like, I remember I linked up my bank account to Venmo and I was like, yeah, I don't know what our execs at JP Morgan are thinking, but Plaid still works. I remember bringing that up to the interview of like, it still works. And like, don't worry, we'll tell you more. Like, if you do join, we will tell you how we've been able to figure this stuff out. So I was like, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, they kind of had this secret that no one else understood yet.
Yes. And then the other part was, that's as part of my interview, I cold emailed and Matt Hamilton, give him a quick shout out. He was one of the early PMs at Venmo. I sent him a cold email, or as a friend of mine that kind of knew him, and I was like, hey, I'm interviewing at Plaid, and I know that Venmo uses Plaid to do this. Can you just send me some thoughts on Plaid and send me some thoughts on what is it like kind of integrating with them, right?
Yep.
And he gave me a bunch of thoughts, and I was like, great, that's really helpful for me to learn. Then two, I brought that up during my final round interview, right, with Zach of, hey, by the way, I talked to this PM that uses Plaid, and here's some of the feedback that he has, right? And I remember Zach coming and be like, oh, that's actually like really helpful. Like Matt has not told us that before. And I remember thinking, my job is to talk to customers and to talk to prospects and get them to use Plaid. And so like I kind of did it, right?
Yeah, you're doing the job before you actually.
I'm doing the job before you do the job, right? Yeah. But it wasn't that much work to do, right? And so I continue to think that there's often doing that, and then to Mahdi's point and to your point around like the context and secrets, like those things are actually quite valuable, and some of those are actually really interesting ways to find interesting companies and get perspectives around there.
We often find on the hiring side, when you are hiring and when you're on the flip side looking to get hired, case studies where you are trying to encourage a person to basically do the job that they are looking to join into is great for both sides. It gives you a real sense of what is both the work product quality, depth of thinking in a compressed time frame, and gives the person that is potentially excited to join a sense of what will you really be doing beyond the glory of what you think the job is, because things are always different.
Yeah.
And so we've always found it super helpful to not just rely on references, but go really deep into this is the job. Let's get to work quality and product that could be basically the first thing that you'll be working on if you were to join. So that's always been, at least I found it super impactful.
Yeah. And then I think to one of the original questions on what I wish I'd known, I have a better answer now. I think as I've worked with more startups and more founders, I think we basically landed every hyper growth company is kind of a complete shit show. It's just, I think the most important thing is of knowing what kind of shit show you're working with and like what's broken in the company.
So there's good and bad shit shows.
There's good and bad shit shows, right? Hyper growth inherently means that you are growing so fast that you literally can't keep up with the scale of that growth, right? We talk about this as, I think it's a very unnatural way of building companies and building businesses, because you have to grow at this exponential rate, right? Fundamentally, I think most people and humans are not meant to like learn or do things at an exponential rate, right? We generally learn things and process things in a relatively linear rate, right? And the most common answer, right, is, okay, great. If you're going to hypergrowth, it's higher, right? There was this sort of like hyperscale hiring playbook that we saw played out a little bit in the last 4 or 5 years during the pandemic, right? Yep. But more bodies set at a problem does not equal more output, right? If anything, it's oftentimes the opposite, right? Where when you hire 1,000 people in 3 months, right? You have to onboard them. You have to give them context. You have to make sure you're orchestrating what they do, right? Oftentimes, smaller teams will deliver way more outsized impact, right? Just given if they're all pointing at the same direction. Whereas you have 1,000 people pointing different directions, like you're going to go nowhere, right? And so building a hypergrowth company there's always going to be something broken, right? And another framework I like to talk about with founders is, okay, there are things that are rubber balls, right, within the company, and there's things that are glass balls, right? There's things that cannot be broken around that, right? I think things like that tend to be around culture, around hiring, although some of those could be kind of one-way, two-way doors.
So those are glass or rubber?
Those are glass, where I think if you completely F up your culture, it's really hard to go backwards, right? And so there are things that the founder should really, really care about, right? I mean, customer relationships with key critical customers, right? Where oftentimes if you mess that up, and you mess that up for too long, right? You can't go back, right? If that customer turns off and it really hits the product, like that's a one-way door, right? And I would consider those to be glass balls. There's a lot of things that are going to be rubber balls, right? You can't keep everything running at 100% at these type of companies. And so the one thing that I wish I'd probably known, and I've gone to know a little bit more when I talk to founders, is like, what is just broken in the company today, right? What is it that you wish we were doing way better on, right? And I'd much rather walk into a company and know what I'm kind of know what to expect versus walking to a company and just being constantly surprised that this culture is really toxic, or we're hiring really badly over here, but we think we're hiring well. And just like having more of that context at the end of the day, like helps you, I think, able to have the level of a conversation.
The other side of that is you can find a company with great culture, great people. They also still need to be in the right market with a product that ultimately customers want and want to pay for, and they'll turn to a real business. Ultimately, gravity is quite strong. One of the strongest natural forces, particularly in venture. And so if you're in a situation where the company's growing really well, it's a product people want, culture is good, and you have great founders who are good people, things will figure themselves out. On the flip side, if you're missing a few of those kind of critical early ingredients, it's really, really hard to pivot out of it, and perhaps not necessarily the best situation. For instance, with Robinhood, we were in one of the largest markets out there, which is asset management, with a product that the customers wanted, and many times we did not necessarily do prioritize the right things. Quarters we missed, mishires we did. But we had multiple margins of safety because the initial product was just so good and just bought us almost years of extra runway with our customers, with our board, and with the business that today Robinhood is.
Yeah, interesting. Continuing on this kind of early employees, a Robinhood, you buy equity. I know we were going to talk about equity as a startup employee. How does it actually work?
It really depends, I think, on the stage that you're joining, right? But we'll talk about it from an early stage perspective, right? Where generally speaking, and this is all stuff I did not know, which I probably should have known in retrospect, but you join a company, right? I think I was under the perception of, you join this company, you get granted this magical equity package, and, someday the company IPOs and you get really rich, right?
Yeah. So that's not how it works?
That's usually not how it works.
Okay.
In fact, rarely how that works. Even if the company IPOs, you will probably not be rich. Fun fact, yes.
Turns out taxes on employee equity really high.
Yeah, taxes. Really? Although there are some ways to optimize around taxes, which we'll talk about in a bit probably. But turns out,
how do you do that?
QSBS is amazing. Yep. If you are an early equity employee, I would highly recommend learning about QSBS. I won't go into specific details around it, but basically allows you to do earn up to, I think it's like a lot of your potential income on during an exit can be basically full federally tax free, and depending on the state that you're in, can make just fully tax free.
Yeah, it's like the first 10 million.
First 10 million. Yeah, generally like your company has to be QSBS eligible. You have to own the stock for 5 years,
and they have to have raised, I believe, less than 50 million of equity.
I believe so, of equity.
And by the time you joined?
No, by the time that you have exercised the option.
Okay.
Yeah, so you need to have been, you can, this could be very, very long. But I recommend, here are the topics I recommend you learning if you are thinking about joining an early stage company. Learning about early exercise. So most of your grants will be options where you have to pay to exercise your options. You're not just granted options magically. It's actually generally beneficial for you from a tax perspective, because technically if you were granted options, they are worth something. You have to pay taxes on top of this, potentially worthless equity. Whereas an option gives you the right to exercise that option for that equity grant. And so if you decide the company's worthless, you don't have to exercise those options, right? So learn about options and stock price, particularly around ISOs and NSOs, which are typically the two types of grants that employers are usually offered. Learn about early exercising, because early exercising is the main way that you can actually potentially get a QSBS exemption around the gains that you might make. The play there is basically if your company is QSBS eligible and they haven't raised that much more funding, you can actually technically exercise before you vest your options. Learning about vesting schedules. So when you're given an option package, you don't just get it, right? You have to sort of earn it. Usually it's a function of staying at the company. Most equity packages are typically 1 year cliff for your vesting, meaning that if you leave before 1 year, you don't get any of your equity. If you stay for 1 year, that's when you get your first sort of 1/4 tranche of the equity. And then if you stay there for 4 years, you vest your entire tranche of equity, right? But that's also why you typically will see people, start to think about leaving after 4 years, because usually that meant that they vested out, most of that early grant, right? They may have gotten refresher grants as that company has grown or whatnot, but generally speaking, also the most valuable grant of equity that you get and the cheapest grant of equity that you'll grant will be that first initial grant. Okay. Right. So would recommend also, depending upon your own financial situation, negotiating. If you are joining early, negotiate as hard as you possibly can to get as much early equity as possible. That is a one-way door. You can't, if the company grows in valuation, you can't just magically give cheaper equity. As the company grows in valuation, the strike price goes up. So those further grants are going to be more expensive to a certain extent.
To exercise.
Yeah, for you to exercise, and also for you to clear the valuation as to where that was raised at.
It is your first and best shot at being a meaningful stockholder of that company.
Yes.
Yeah. And effectively, if you want for it to drive generational wealth for you, try to negotiate as much as
think about it as monopoly money. It is not real money. You probably won't make any off of it, but in the rare event that it does become impactful, you should 100% optimize and get the best possible position as early as possible. And I think you should think like an investor, right? I think that's one of the things I wish I had known and learned was to Mahdi's point around thinking like an investor when joining an early stage company, right? When you join an early stage company as one of the first engineers, first business people, you have a portfolio size of 1 of 1, right?
Yep.
I remember I talked to people of, we're venture investors, right? We think we're very good, right? We see a lot of founders, a lot of companies. For us to have to deliver amazing returns for our LPs, we just need to find 1 or 2 great companies in our portfolio, right? You as an early employee, if you really want that equity to be worth something, you have 1 shot. You have 1 shot, right?
Yep.
That's oftentimes a trap, right? Because I think there's other ways to think about compounding. And at the end of the day, like I would definitely recommend if you're going early stage, you're not doing it for the money or for the opportunity to do that, right? It's probably because you want to get that early stage experience. You want to maybe learn how to start a company. You want to learn how to go from 0 to 1.
Yeah, cool problem, really interesting
problem, great founders, great people, right? And the money and the equity is the upside, but definitely optimize as much as you possibly can on the equity side too, because that is a one-way door. Cash is always, you can always get readjusted to market comp at any point in time, but the equity side, you can't actually.
Okay. But Charlie, one question. So then you kind of joined Ramp then. I think you were the first sales or growth person. What's the story there? I mean, they've kind of, I think, bigger valuation than Plaid.
Ramp is crushing. Very lucky. So I'd been at Plaid for about, what we talked about before, 4 or 5 years or so. So I invested a lot of the early initial grant, and I still had some vesting to go on some refreshers. But Plaid had gotten to be relatively large, right?
Yeah, they had. This is around the time the Visa acquisition thing, like right around COVID.
Yes. Yeah. So my last day at Plaid was the week that we announced the acquisition by Visa. So that was a very surreal week.
Really? And it didn't go through, obviously.
It didn't go through at the end of the day, but I think it was sort of like, it felt as though this combination of like, hey, we built this amazing business and we're almost close to the land of liquidity. Thanks DOJ for stopping that.
Shout out to Lena Khan.
Not Lena Khan, FTC,
and then all of our predecessor friends.
Yeah, but thanks to the DOJ there. But the goal was I always want to actually start a company. Like that was what I was starting to get really excited about, interested in. I was exploring ideas and loose ideas in fintech and payments. One of those ideas was around accounts payables and account receivables. Like this is sort of Brex had emerged as being this, really fast growing fintech in sort of corporate cards, right? Yep. And I thought, there's a bunch of stuff happening in corporate cards, but there isn't much as activity around sort of billing, procurement, that area. But it was sort of, I think I was kind of landing at, I don't know how excited I personally am about this, but I think there should be a company in this space. Ended up meeting the founders of Ramp via Andrew Unger. So shout out to Andrew for introducing me to Eric and Kareem. And I remember the first meeting that I had with Eric and Kareem, I remember feeling, this is like, it was a bit gut instinct. So like, this is the closest thing I felt to actually meeting the early Plaid team, where they were, I think, very, very sharp on, hey, short, medium term, this is the product that we're building, right? We're building this corporate card built for savings. This is the value prop in market. This is how we're going to attack it. But like really the opportunity set that we're actually going after is like building an end-to-end sort of payments platform for CFOs, for founders, for CEOs to really run their business on top of. But here's sort of the wedge and here's how much we built, right? I think it was a combination of, really crystal initial wedge product, combine that with a really, really large vision, as well as also they had recruited like an amazing early engineering team. But I think, I remember one of the concerns I had, I'd moved back to New York in 2018. And I remember I moved here for personal reasons. My girlfriend, now wife, did not want to move back to San Francisco. Okay. So at some point, Plaid was, okay, we'll move you out to New York and you can open up a New York office and figure that side out. We acquired a company here in New York called Quovo and was involved in a lot of that, right? But I remember being, I might be taking a step back in my career, moving out from San Francisco to New York, right? But I remember meeting the Ramp team and the Ramp engineers and the early kind of hires there and being like, this is an SF S tier quality early founder team, and it was one of the few teams I've ever met in New York that like just had that quality bar and level of execution, right? And then the other part I think was maybe a bit of the earned secret from talking to the Ramp founders. I remember I talked to a bunch of investors about I think this company is weirdly interesting. And a lot of investors are also, I don't know, like there's, Brex has done really fantastically well. They've raised a bunch of money. They're growing really quick. There's 5-6 other corporate card players that aren't doing super well. This is going to be like the 7th, 8th one. Like, is that really, the interesting company, right?
Yeah, that's a pretty layup pass for a VC.
Yeah, most VCs, like, hey, there's a big winner here. It's backed by tier 1 VCs. That's the one, right?
Yep.
And I think the earned secret that I think I maybe brought to the Ramp side when I was talking to them was, I think there's second mover advantage in the sort of corporate card payments landscape, right? Where if you've talked to, I had the benefit of working with a lot of fintech companies via my experience at Plaid. It's even how Mahdi originally met when he was running a lot of the product and growth of Robinhood, where there was this sort of V1 era of fintech infrastructure that was built during this sort of 2010 era, right? And the running sort of joke was every time Robinhood would enter sort of another day, it'd be a whole new level of scale that we'd never seen before.
Because they've grown,
because they're growing so quick, so fast, and like there's never been a company like that growing that quickly, right? And so from an infrastructure perspective, like it was also really challenging for us on the Plaid side and for issuing and brokerage and everything. Every provider was being tested extremely hard. I'm sure you guys went through a ton of different vendors, right?
We were a very demanding customer, and sometimes a horrible customer. Where we were very demanding to the Plaid team, very demanding to Galileo team, very demanding on our infrastructure and AWS providers. I think we, at one point in time, were almost 2% of AWS revenue, which is not something you actually want to be proud of.
Because it's a big bill.
It is a very big bill. AWS is very, very big product line. And so we tested everyone, and the great thing is, to Charlie's point, new infrastructure providers that were built cloud native for a day zero startup all the way to scale, that were API first, was almost a net new thing in financial services.
And so I think Ramp had the benefit of, I think the Kareem and Eric were very deliberate around the architecture on how we're going to build and scale from day one to like true large scale of this is what our fintech infrastructure stack's going to look like. We're going to use best in breed scalable products, API first, as much as possible, to allow us to be able to ship and build as fast as possible. And I think that was a function of just the quality of the engineering team, and two, the quality of the decisions into building that company, which I think Ramp quickly built this like amazing reputation of like just being able to ship stuff super fast. Right. And a lot of that was both due to the quality of the team, but also just the architecture decisions that the founders and the early team made. And I was like I was like by far, like versus a lot of other teams and companies I talked to, like it was really clear that, this is a huge, huge market, right? Sure, Brex had reached really great scale, but was still sort of basis points of spend versus the rest of the corporate card landscape. And the existing software that exists in that space is really bad, right? I would say Plaid was more, we were sort of building, we were building a rapidly growing market, and you can argue also help kind of expand out the market that is fintech. Without Plaid, one can argue that would a lot of these mobile apps in fintech exist? Probably not, right? Ramp, I think, was much more simpler existing very, very large TAM, legacy products aren't super great, and like combine that with, I joked that the ARB was, we would hire these engineers and hey, instead of building in Google DeepMind and doing crazy ML AI stuff, like come build a corporate card. And we're going to build a thing that makes a ton of money and solves a lot of customer demand and need.
And I would say Ramp, even from the very early days, was almost in some ways like a spiritual cousin of Robinhood, in the sense that for financial services product, Robinhood was very clear on, let's make the ROI dead simple. We literally save you money and reduce friction around trading and investing. For Ramp, it was similar, where the focus is on empowering the CFO for savings and giving them permissions and controls for the entire company with the atomic unit of the employee. Which is very simple from every other provider within that market, from a product and product marketing basis.
Yeah, so got super lucky there. I think Plaid, definitely, without Plaid, I would not have been able to kind of step zone and get introduced and kind of have the experience around there. And then we ended up growing really, really fast, which was kind of crazy.
Yeah, so it was a question that I got from one of my founders. He's got a fintech company in Italy. His name's Mattia. He had a question, basically, how did you get the first couple customers signed up? You've got this like B2B fintech product. What's sort of the playbook that you maybe would use, best practices?
Yeah.
What would your strategy be?
I was saying that in the Ramp case, it was quite straightforward. I literally just opened up the network of anyone that I knew that I thought Ramp had as a product was something that any company can use it, right? There were certain criteria that we were looking for from a IC perspective, ideal customer perspective, that we really want to index on, right? Where early on, the ICP for us was, okay, we're noticing this interesting gap in the market on a lot of founders would start off with a card like Brex, right? But at some point they would hire a finance team, and that finance team would implement an Expensify plus an Amex. And I remember being like, that's really weird. Like the whole thesis was you start off with, corporate card and you would stay and scale with the corporate card, right?
Yep.
I think at the time there just wasn't that much great competition, right? And Brex also just was growing so quickly in the startup ecosystem that I don't think they were necessarily focused on building a lot of these products for the controller, for the CFO, around reporting, reconciliation, accounting, et cetera, right? And as well as also the positioning on savings. I mean, at the time during, pre-COVID, I remember we would go pitch to some of these finance people and CFOs and be like, no, I'm not worried about savings. Like, I've raised a ton of money. My VCs tell me that the money will keep on coming, right? Yeah. The money faucet will always be on. Yeah. Obviously, during the pandemic, that changed pretty dramatically. Turned off, then turned on and off again, right?
Whiplash.
It was kind of whiplash, right? But all of a sudden now, CFOs started, and especially now, right, in the last few years, that is very top of mind, right? The saving value prop was really important. And two, I think we were building product for this kind of more scaled finance team, right? And so the early customers were literally our founders that we knew. I think the founders of Ramp also did a great job of what I call kind of weaponizing the cap table, right? They brought on ICP founders, companies, operators that could act as potential design customers, right? And we were shameless. Like, if you talk to any investor at Ramp, the first thing that we'll do if you invest in the company is, great, like, let us know who you're investing into. We're going to look through your portfolio list. These are the companies that we think are going to be really great fits for our product. We would love an intro to them right now, right? And we would do that every single week. Anyone across my network, across the rest of the team's network, it was, we talked about sort of, doing things that don't scale. And this is a great example of that. But my other correlate to that is that actually scales really well. Like, each additional person that you bring into the company, right? Each person that you hire into the company is another node that you add to the network, and they will know people that will probably fit with the ICP. The key thing, I think, is being very, very particular around, not accepting everybody, right? Because if you're building a product for everybody, you're probably building a product for nobody, right? And so being very specific on these are the criteria of companies, people, personas you want to go and target, and then doing whatever possible to get in front of those people. And more often than not, it's usually leveraging your personal network.
And this wasn't you're starting from zero. You already had built a pretty big network over the past 5 years, or so.
Yeah, I think in this case, for the founders and the team and the early team, like, had a great networking ecosystem, and we definitely leveraged that to our advantage.
Do you have then? Is that like a common framework that you would say for a go-to-market? Like, first thing is rely on your network.
I would say it's really always dependent on what is the end customer and what is the product that you're building for them. If it is a horizontal product, and let's say it's your startup founder, your immediate network is other startup founders, and it's directly applicable for them, and you're solving a need for them, obviously you should go through your immediate network of peers. If you're building for a health system and the product is meant for them, you have to think about who is the ultimate end customer. And ultimately, the question goes to, even if you're going into your peer network, what is the ROI that you're providing for them? What jobs to be done are you solving for them? And are these real pain points for real people that they're willing to pay for? That always makes the conversation a lot easier, no matter what the product is, or what go-to-market you might might be solving for.
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of also traps, right? Like we'd always recommend if your ICP does happen to be your network, like leverage that, right? But oftentimes we also find that sometimes, you know, the friends that you want to sell to as a founder, they are not going to tell you the honest truth. Like no one wants to say that your baby is ugly, right? It's always been, it's so cute and it's adorable, right? And oftentimes when you're pitching a company, right, then usually from your friends you hear, that sounds really exciting, that's really interesting. And then the moment you're like, well, okay, all right, here's, you know, the checkout page and pay me $10,000, it's hold on, let me bring in some more people, let me get back to you. And you know, the replies come a little slower, right?
Not all friction is bad. Asking for someone to pay for your product should be encouraged, because that is real product market fit, particularly if you can replicate that and build a $100 million revenue business. Yeah,
so sometimes we actually really like it when we hear founders say, hey, I cold emailed, you know, X amount of businesses, this is the feedback I've got, and X amount of them have actually I've told me they want this to exist, they're willing to pay me today for this thing, right? If anything, that is a way better indication of potential demand customer pool, right? Then, well, I hit up 100 of my friends and they said it was really exciting and interesting, right? And so it really depends, I would say, around, and this is something that's important for us, is that we care about finding founders and backing founders that have strong opinions about the market that they're building in, the customers that they're trying to build for, the product, and how they think they're going to solve real problems for that customer, and then really actually just going out and actually testing out that demand pool.
You know, I think you mentioned something to me, getting to $1 million in revenue is hard, but sometimes it can be misleading if that's specifically like a PMF milestone. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
The way we've always thought about it is you can anchor yourself on your customer, your product, or something else entirely. If you're anchoring yourself around, this is my ICP, this is my customer, and you map out their jobs to be done, you map out that market, and it's, let's say, a multi-billion-dollar market. Each customer across the jobs that they have in their value chain and the people they're staffing is spending a few million. Getting to that first million may not be that tricky. The real challenge is going from 0 to 1, 1 to 5, 5 to 15, and compounding from there. But we always encourage every founder we work with, map out the entire value chain of jobs to be done for your ICP of customers, for the product that you're building. And are you building the most high value thing for them that they immediately know, hey, this is so impactful for us? And does it give you a right to expand into the other adjacencies? So to Charlie's point, we joke about this sometimes, is getting to that first $1 million in revenue. If you simply ask everyone you know, it might simply be possible, but doesn't really mean you have product market fit. True product market fit is understanding your customer so well that your customers have started telling everyone they know that fit your ICP. They understand your ICP so well, they're referring you to everyone, and they are able to sell your product for you. That is what we think of as real product market fit that will scale into 100 million and beyond.
So you guys are both pretty different. I feel like you have pretty different personalities. You work really well together, though. So you first met Plaid and Robinhood working on stuff. What's the story there? And then when did you first start investing together?
The story there is actually pretty simple. We were one of Plaid's earliest and largest partners and customers on the Robinhood side. And Plaid was actually for us a 100x product that we used. It empowered and enabled our customers to do what was one of the most critical magic moment product experience, which is fund their Robinhood account. Charley was running growth and go-to-market on the fintech side for Plaid. I was helping to run payments on the Robinhood side. So we naturally met there. And the funny thing is Robinhood, we churned off of Plaid.
Yep. Yeah, that could have been tough. That was tough. Yeah.
It was tough.
Why'd you churn?
The whole set of personal product, UX issues, but the important thing is we came back.
Wow. And how'd you win them back?
Props to the Zach and William. They held strong. I remember part of negotiations. I think the Robinhood team was pushing really hard on pricing, and at some point I was like, no, that's walk away. We think that we deliver way more value, and we deliver much higher conversions than any other competitors in the market. Go ahead and go test them out, and we will let you figure that out yourself to a certain extent.
And it was really simple for us. The first year we re-implemented Plaid. Vlad mentioned there are 8 products that do 100 million in revenue. In that first year we re-implemented Plaid, we could attribute to Plaid or 100 million of incremental revenue from converting our customers, saving on the marketing dollars we were already spending. So the value was incredible for us. And that I was perhaps the start of a rough start to what's turned into a terrific partnership over the course of time.
Yeah.
And I think what we've always been aligned on since the early days, I like to spend most of my time with teams on, are we building the right product for the right customer and the right market? And how do we scale from there as needed? And Charley is best in class across three very different companies in go-to-market, which is from SMB to developers to really the enterprise and regulated enterprise with Alloy. And so we found when we were personal angel investing, and then we were scouts with Index Ventures, that we worked really well together. A lot of the founders that we individually partnered with would often say, actually, you guys are perfect fit. And so we would start to do and take calls together with a lot of founders and turn into both good and close personal friends and found a very complementary teams we worked with.
Were you guys trying to start a fund? Because that's what happened. But was that an intention at any point? How did that come about?
You were probably more deliberate around it initially, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, for a number of reasons. So after Robinhood, I had decided to join with another set of folks from Plaid, Reed and Juliana, to help get Stytch off the ground. Stytch is a terrific identity access management team that's built developer first all the way to the enterprise. And with Stytch, I decided during COVID to come back to New York. And it was clear to me that I wanted to return to investing. I had started in kind of more of the traditional financial services side in banking and investing. And so it felt clear to me to make that return, partially to, I think, solve for some of the pain points both on the Robinhood, Stytch, and angel investing side we had seen with our portfolio companies and founders was oftentimes the investors they worked with were not rooted across what is the right thing for the end customer and how we turn this into a venture scale business.
So what was the breaking point, or what was the issue with the traditional model?
The traditional model, we find large funds get in the way of large outcomes for their portfolio companies.
That's bad, because that's what they need. They need big outcomes, right?
Yeah, but the partners at these larger venture funds, they may have different personal incentives, or they're trying to push their own vision and personal pride above what is right for the customer, right for those founders, right for that market. And we had seen this both, at least for me personally, in a number of instances, both with portfolio companies and teams that we had closely worked with. And so there was the seed of what became the roots of there's a product that is missing in the venture market. There was also, I think, the personal ambition of we had already worked with a handful of teams that have done really well, and the peril and great part of the operating journey is if you join the right team, they will scale to unbelievable heights. But did we want to be on our 10th startup journey if we don't love the large company environment? And so there was that push. And then if we could be meaningful parts of the journeys of a number of companies that can transform multiple industries, wouldn't that be incredibly exciting? And so that was, at least for me, part of the drive of come back to venture and then, or come back to investing, and then perhaps take the entrepreneurial route. where perhaps we weren't going to start a traditional B2B software business, but this would be our best attempt to go through our own founding journey and build our fund in the way that founders would build their own startup, which is focus on our product and how fast do we ship our product and the quality of it to founders, to our own team internally, and then to the LPs that we are fortunate to partner with.
Yeah, and I would say mine was a little more winding, but eventually got to, I think, very similar outcomes and answers where, I started angel investing mostly because there was a couple of things. There was a couple of unlocks there. I think that I remember I was in San Francisco and all my friends were like, I'm an early angel in this company. And I was like, how the hell, like, I know how much you make. How are you angel investing?
Yeah, because don't you have to invest like $100,000 or something?
You have to be super rich and a millionaire and have a bunch of money to invest, right? And then as I talked to more people, it's like, and you have to be, accredited and all this stuff. And I'll talk to people like, oh no, I invested $1,000 into the company, right? And I was like, wait, you can do that? You can do that? Yeah. And it's like, yeah, turns out you can, right? The amount of, it's just a little bit of paperwork and it's not that hard for a founder to take $1,000, right? Does it make sense to take on a bunch of $1,000 checks? No, that's the worst way to get around done, right? But founders are very open if you offer a particular introduction or expertise or or willing to spend time or excited about what they're building and they want to bring you on board, right? They're oftentimes more than happy to do that, right? Yeah. And the other side, I also found out, there were a lot of friends from Plaid that are going to start companies that I want to be supportive of. Stytch being a great example of that with Reed and Juliana. And the easiest way would be like, hey, I would love to be, just make the ask, right? I think I just started asking my friends, if you ever start a company, I just love to invest, $1,000, $2,000, right? At some point, I was trying to save money for business school. I was going to put, the money into the money pit that is business school, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to take that and throw it into the money pit that is angel investing, right?
And Charley got the business school version of startups, which is 3 hyper growth startups from the early days.
Yeah, so decided not to go to business school.
You joined this company called Alloy.
Yes,
which that's probably the least well known.
Yeah.
Can you real quick explain them and then just like
Alloy provides a decision engine for risk and identity, right? So it sells primarily to financial institutions from small fintech companies all the way to large banks and FIs. And what they help them do is they help them on one side connect to all the different data sources that you need to onboard a consumer, right? And creates on top of that workflows that allows you to make decisions using that data, right? So whether that's have you ever gone through a KYC process, know your customer, where you had to, upload your ID, enter in your social security number, and they ask you all these additional questions and workflows? Like that's what Alloy provides the infrastructure for.
So typically, if I was a fintech, I would have to build a lot of those capabilities in some way.
Yes. Usually, you'd have to figure out how to integrate all the different data sources. You have to build a lot of internal tooling. A lot of this stuff historically across fintech companies has been handled in code. With banks, it's handled a lot by people. Which is kind of terrifying.
From the Robinhood perspective, for instance, we had multiple teams from onboarding to fraud to KYC that built parts of this product internally. And in total, that probably is around 80 to 100 plus people, not even including the operations folks.
Wow.
So Alloy and products like Alloy are, the ROI is incredible because from a technology and from a sheer cost and human toil and also fraud toil for our customers, it's one of the highest ROI product and customer experiences you can have.
Yeah. So my whole thing was, okay, I realized that I really like this early stage experience, right? Where it's maybe we just hit product market fit, but we're figuring out all the things on the GTM side. And that sort of was the specialty I built out, right? I don't think I'm amazing in anything, but I'm pretty decent at sales, at marketing, account management, implementations, integrations, like all the things you need to think about. And I would say like technical for a non-technical person, right, would be the other spike that I would highlight, and could think about things in systems and structures, but also just do the job, right? And the intent and purposes around angel investing and around joining these companies was I wanted to be a founder for whatever reason, right? I think there is a certain prestige given to if you're a founder. It's cool. You started something, right? And I have a lot of respect for founders, right? It's a lot of work, emotional toll. people, just like mind share that goes into being a founder, right? I think being an early employee is the closest thing to it, but it's still not to the same extent as being the founder, just in some ways in the other, right? Where everything around the company is dependent on you, right? And, depending upon where you're at, you can't just, as an early employee, at the end of the day, I can be like, you know what? I don't really like this. I want to go work on something else. Like, bye all. Great run. I'm gonna find the next thing, right? As a founder, no, if you're, if your company isn't doing well, there's a lot of people dependent upon you. You have to, it's personal. There's a lot of your personal identity attached to it, right? And so I think I landed, okay, I want to go start a company, but the best way I can find and look at interesting ideas would be invest in really smart people. So I asked my friends, whenever you start a company, like I'd love to invest in your company. Whatever you build, I don't care. Here's some money, right? And just keep me updated on what you're building and just what you learn. And I'm going to use that as a way to learn, right? Over time, then I started to specialize in specific areas of areas that were interested across go-to-market software, across vertical software, across developer infrastructure, fintech. I was like, these are areas that I think are kind of interesting. And the intent was I want to build a portfolio of founders and companies that I'm interested and excited about. I remember being, the number one advice that a lot of people give when you think about joining an early stage company is go talk to investors, right? Investors have the inside information on how the company is doing, what that founder is like, right? And so I was like, I might as well be like an investor and get the inside track on these founders, right? So I built a portfolio, and the full intent was, okay, if I want to go find the next space to build or the next company to join, I'll have some inside information based off of just having a relationship with being an investor in that company, right? So that's also how I ended up kind of finding Alloy and some of the others, where I was exploring these spaces, and I was like, I think this is like Tommy, Laura, Charles. I built by far the most robust product. I think a lot of people didn't know that it was the most robust product in market,
and that's where you came in
and
told everybody about it.
Tried to get the name out there. I think we did a pretty good job, and the team continues to execute there on the Alloy side. But then at some point, the other running joke that I have with our LPs is that I've applied to venture a few times throughout my career.
Really? Okay.
I have.
I didn't know this.
Once again, I've not been able to successfully convert at getting a job within venture. A lot of times, I think there was a period when I was thinking about leaving Plaid, and I was like, this venture thing is interesting, right? I remember the feedback I got was, we're kind of looking for people with like product experience or product manager experience or technical experience. Like you kind of come from this like sales background.
Yeah, it's kind of funny when that's probably like one of the most tangible things.
Right now, it's great, right?
Roll up your sleeves and edit the code.
And one would argue for a large part of a venture job is sales. To founders, to their customers, to their hires.
And I was candidly also probably very bad at interviewing for venture, and it still had a lot to learn on the venture side. But I remember being, there's an age of like, no, everything's going to go PLG, and salespeople are going to die, and outbound is dying. Every year outbound is dying, right?
That was like the peak of 2020, 2021.
Yes. And they're like, we don't know if your skill set's going to be relevant. And I was like, okay, great. And so I think at some point I was like, screw it. Like, I'm just going to go and invest my own time and money and capital, right, and build a portfolio. I remember I came out another time. This is sort of, and I remember I got the feedback of, your background's quite interesting, but you're too senior to be like an analyst or associate. I'm more than happy to be an associate, but like we don't really know where to place you. You don't have quite enough credibility to be a partner yet, we think, and we don't know where to put you in our partnership dynamic. And that's when I also start to learn more about partnership dynamics within firms and funds. And the more I learned about that, the more I was like, that's actually not what I'm interested in, actually. Like that game on, to Mahdi's point, on sort of the multi-stage incentives and sort of like what is a career track there. I was like, that's not actually what I'm interested in. Like the reason why I think venture is really exciting is we get an amazing opportunity to back founders as early as possible, be a first early check and believer into that company, and help bring a company with that founder's vision into its existence, right? The part I'm not as interested, and hopefully also drive great returns, right, for our LPs, right? And those two things should be greatly aligned. I'm not as interested in sort of like the prestige games, the like the coolness factor. We are quite introverted. We don't like going to events. We don't really do stuff like this. We're not really, big Twitter brand people, whatnot. That doesn't come natural to us, right? So like that part of venture is that's just not our vibe, right? We just want to find great founders. And I think when I kind of started talking to Mahdi more, it was like, I think this entrepreneur path around starting a fund, like, is quite interesting. It's not just find great founders, but it's like we have to build a fund, hire a team. We think about everything from a go-to-market perspective. And I sort of realized like, oh yeah, at the end of the day, like this is a sales go-to-market job at the end of the day again.
Yeah. So Fund 1, when did you guys officially kind of start working together? And actually, this might be a good time to talk about you're doing a rebrand. You kind of just announced it. Talk about that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Fund 1 we started late 2021. We were fortunate. I think with anyone early in their career starting something new, someone takes a leap of faith on you. And for us, we were fortunate where folks like Nick Shellick from Ribbit, Alfred from Sequoia, a number of other great mentors, some of whom went to my high school decades before me, took leaps of faith on us and helped us get started. So we started Fund 1 in late 2021, which was an interesting time to get started on the tail end of the last valuation technology boom, and then kind of the last 2 years where there's a meaningful paradigm shift on what really matters. And I think what's always stayed true is really focus on the customer, really focus on the quality of the founder, and really focus on markets and opportunities where you have the opportunity, the chance to get big and work with the folks that will drive that success. And so we try to practice this philosophy of high conviction, low velocity in terms of number of teams that we partner with. It's always just a handful every year, but bring a constant application of force in every interaction and way that we can help those teams. And on the rebrand, we are.
You just announced.
We just announced.
So we're Pathlight Ventures. We excited about also having an actual real domain, so pathlight.vc.
Wow, the VC domain.
.vc domain, yeah. Wow. I was our old domain. We constantly get people with the .co, and the .coms also weren't available, and so I think we wanted to also come up with something I think pithier than sort of what we had before. But at the end of the day, it's a function of the team. The team's still the same. We also relatively about a couple months ago announced a third partner on the team, Sean, who brought on board and we're really excited about, and we'll continue to kind of keep the team small and lean and continue to be focused on the same things that we had before. But yeah, on Fund 1, the interesting thing I think perhaps wrinkle in the story was so we originally we started angel investing together. We were kind of initially going down this this solo GP route. We were working with a lot of the GPs and getting advice from a lot of GPs that Mahdi sort of mentioned before, and we're getting feedback of hey, you guys should just talk to each other, right? You're already friends, and both were in New York at that around the same time too, for kind of also personal reasons. And the more we sort of kind of worked and talked together, of hey, this actually would be extremely complementary, right? From what we look at, what we focus, the questions that we ask, how we talk and work and interact with founders, skill sets, etc. But the interesting part was timing, right? Mahdi was already full-time going out. I'm going to go hell or high water, figure out how to get this fund up on the ground. And I made a commitment that I wanted to finish out with Alloy, right? With the founders thereof. Yep. We were going through some interesting times, kind of 2021 or so, right? I think that we also did a similar thing of we recomped our entire exec team. We refocused a lot of the aspects of the business, and there was still a lot of work to be done on that side, right? I wanted to kind of make sure to see that through, but I was also spending a lot nights and weekends pretty much just staying up constantly working with talking to founders, working on investments together, and so we decided, hey, let's figure out with Fund 1 how to I was in this sort of half the time was on Alloy, half the time on the fund, nights and weekends, and getting the timing kind of lined up on that.
And in many ways it's similar to marriage. Both of us actually, funny enough, got married
around the same time.
Around the same time last year, which was unplanned, but similar to marriage, and you need the right chemistry, the right things that you bring to the table, or the right commitment, and timing is always a consideration. And for us, we want to work together, not necessarily let timing be the issue. And so we made it work over the course of both Fund 1, and then we're both enthusiastic to be driving Fund 2 onwards.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys brought that up, because that was a question from both Finn Murphy and Jaron Glover. Both were timing, just like weird. Like they were kind of part-time. Like they could have easily not done this because it's just the timing wasn't exactly the greatest. So
you need to really want it generally, and then to want it to make it work.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that also, I mean, we have the benefit of we've known each other for a long time before and worked together, right? And a lot of, to Mahdi's point around, it is a marriage in a weird way, right? And so I think there's also a lot of, we had a lot of deliberate discussion around what is the type of firm that we want to build, what do the next 20, 30, 40 years look like? Or do we want to dedicate the next 20, 30, the rest of our lives, right? Building this thing, right? As co-founders, value alignment, how we think about making decisions, like all of those were important conversations and inputs into starting a fund together.
And the way we fundamentally think about it is our startup, our company together. We are co-founders, and we are driving it as such across the products being the product we provide and experience we provide to founders who we work with, the product we provide to the team. We do want to be a best-in-class team, both across performance, across the value we deliver to those stakeholders on the founder side, and hopefully a home ground where other great investors over the course of the next decade or a few decades would love to join as we build out our team, and then deliver value to our limited partners. Our limited partners are all nonprofits, whether they be hospitals or universities across the U.S., supporting terrific causes. And if there's an opportunity for us to help create outstanding companies with outstanding people on the founder side and deliver terrific value to great charitable causes that can fund a child's surgery, that's what we're incredibly excited about. And so that's kind of the crux for us, is treat it as a startup. And this is hopefully the last job we ever do.
Yeah. Well, I'm talking about product. So one thing, Jacqueline and Artie, I think that's our only like mutual investment. At least maybe angel stuff, maybe overlap.
Yeah.
But she said the question I have to ask you is, why do you think founders like you so much? I guess it's a loaded question from her, but I mean, she's just like, yeah, like founders love them. What do you think it is? Like, what is the product that you give to founders that makes them like you so much?
I think the first level is super simple. Every team we partner with is very meaningful for us. We run a high conviction, low velocity strategy. And the great part of that is there's a part of being very patient until we find the right team in the right market. And then the other side of it, in terms of how we work with those teams, is keep it really focused on just product, go to market, on that long-term journey of getting to 100 million. And we try to be radically transparent. I think Jacqueline, for instance, never has to guess what we are thinking. And we're in the kind of fortunate case where anytime we have a suggestion, Jacqueline and Robin, our co-founder, have not just thought of it, tested it, iterated on it, and shipped it likely to customers and likely already driving revenue and value for customers. And we always try to be level-headed and just good people to work with, and hopefully the types of investors we would have wanted to work with years ago when we were operating.
Yeah, I would say the other part I'll add, I think we learned this as angels, and I was honestly shocked at, is that it's a really low bar to be how can it be helpful as an investor, right?
My favorite line.
It's but the best line, right?
It's so
it's a great meme, and it's true, because the vast majority of investors are not actually helpful, right? What is actually helpful, right? What is actually helpful is you help me hire somebody, right? You answer my emails, you answer my call when I have a question. You send me customers that are actually good, qualified customers, and that's probably pretty much it, right?
And don't be harmful.
And don't be harmful to the founders, right? And then I think the other part that I'll add is that, and we want to always be very, very transparent on sort of how we think about the state of the business, how we think they're doing, and vice versa, how they think about us, right? And I think that the bar is just, I think, shockingly low, particularly at sort of seed and early stage and Series A. If you actually just care about what the founder should be caring about too, right? And you sort of figure out how to kind of get yourself alignment there. The rest kind of solves itself, right? What isn't helpful is, oh, hey, this is what I did at Plaid. I think you should try this, right? Or, hey, I saw this at Ramp, I think you should do this thing, right?
Is that the go-to typically?
I think that I think we see that with whether it's ex-founders or ex-operators that move into venture, or it's, hey, I've seen my portfolio company do this thing, and so I'm trying to pattern match it onto this thing, right? Without really thinking about first principles, does it actually make sense for that company, right? And like, does it make sense in the competitive landscape that they're in, the customers that they're selling into, the market landscape of what that looks like today, the founder skill sets, and sort of like where they spike and where they not, right? I think actually truly thinking about that versus even our interaction, and this is where some of the operating experience is helpful, right? Yep. Where I remember we would sit on. I remember it was a board meeting that I had, and one of our investors at one of the companies I was working at was, okay, so it's I think you should figure out this enterprise sales thing, right? I think in the next 6 months, like we should land $1 million contract, right? On paper, sure. That sounds great, right? Okay, what tactically actually goes into that, right? If you've never sold an enterprise customer, right, and you actually want to go staff a team, right? Hey, generally speaking, it's going to take you probably 2 to 3 months to actually find and hire the person, right? For whoever you're going to hire to be your head of enterprise sales, right? To kind of go and figure that out if you're not doing that yourself, right? It's going to take another 2 to 3 months to actually onboard that person, right?
And there's your 6 months.
Right, that's 6 months right there, right? It's going to take you another 2 to 3 months to build the pipeline, to get that sales process going. It's going to take a 6 months to 1 year sales cycle, right?
And then implementation,
et cetera. So even to get that first signed contract, it was like, oh, for us to go into enterprise, we should have done that almost 2 years ago, right? Us doing that as a last minute grasp today, like it's just that's a ridiculous statement, right? To make. But unless you've actually, I think, been in the trenches, have actually figured out how to work that, but and approach that from a true first principles perspective, I think a lot of that advice oftentimes just isn't really helpful for the founder at the end of the day.
It's a combination of context is really, really important for there are many different ways to drive a venture scale public company outcome. And one way we always think about it is you could have 100 customers that pay you $1 million each. You could have 1,000 customers that pay you 100,000 each, or you could have 100,000 customers that pay you 1,000 each. All three of those could be great companies. But it really depends on who's your customer, what is your product, and what is your distribution, and are you well equipped across people, product, and being able to drive that forward with the right ingredients. Yeah. So we try to always think about it in kind of those simple atomic units.
Yeah, no, it's usually it's funny. I think a lot of founders will back them, and then the first meeting will be like, have a bunch of questions, and I would love answers too. And usually our answer is, we actually don't have an answer for you, right? The more interesting thing is, let's actually are we asking the right questions, right?
And are we running with the right, hopefully, intuition, what we've heard from customers, being able to layer it together? Are we running the right experiments so we can get answers or get no's really fast? We strongly believe in running experiments. We run experiments every single day.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I think we want our founders to be running the companies, right? We are not there to run the company. We want to provide perspective and advice, or whatever it's valuable as an input, right? But at the end of the day, we are not the ones. We spend a lot of time thinking about our founders and trying to do what's best for them, right? But our founders are the ones. Jacqueline is the one that's spending 24/7 of her time thinking about her customers, thinking about the market, thinking about Artie, right? Yep. And if we can provide, great input into that, like that's our end goal.
Yeah. So I think, Artie, another good topic, maybe I want to talk about, how do you guys make a decision? Like how do you decide what to invest in? We talk about from the employee perspective, there's a little bit of an analogy, but from your guys' perspective, and maybe Artie is a good case study of just, what does the company do? Yeah. Like why did you make the investment?
Yeah, so
maybe do you want to start with kind of where we tend to invest and sort of like what we look for?
Yeah, the overarching maybe on how we think about investing and what are the instances in which we get really excited is the overarching question we're looking to answer is this a company that has a good chance to get to 100 million plus of revenue, high margin revenue, and do it efficiently? The inputs to that are, is it the right team that can drive that forward? Are they building the right product that customers love? And are they in the market that can actually support this scale of outcome where there's momentum? Artie's a perfect example of this, where they are building today a real-time data replication and change management company. They are anchored towards selling into data infrastructure, data engineering teams, where quite often the initial land from a revenue basis is in the tens of thousands, but very quickly can grow and expand into the hundreds of thousands and scale quickly over the course of time.
This is just like how much data you are processing.
Yeah, exactly. How much data are you processing is at core to your product experience for your customers. And this is something that applies to companies that are kind of mid-stage in growth, and from a contract basis would be tens of thousands, all the way to enterprise customers where this is fundamental to their product experience, and data is at the core of their business, and that are opportunities to build multi-million-dollar revenue opportunities for Artie, and allows that customer to potentially consolidate their data infrastructure. And so this is a perfect combination of team. Between Jacqueline and Robin, they blend a very natural commercial instinct where in Jacqueline, Robin being able to really understand from a product and engineering base, what do customers really want? How can I test it well ahead of building it? And by the time I build it, I already have a pipeline of customers that I know will buy it. And the references we did it on Robin were the most commonly used phrase for him was Robin is a technical god. An open door.
Yep.
Which is great to hear. And Jacqueline is a perfect complement of being able to distill that to customers. And they are a joint pair together in a lot of ways, and have invested kind of everything they have in making Artie successful. And that's something we deeply appreciate. I think on a personal level, we also love hanging out with them, which isn't necessarily a must, but it's a nice to have.
Yeah.
And we think right market, right product. We heard that in the early customer love and evidence of that. And best in class team.
Yeah, and proof points I think on speed of execution, right? Like I think we both met them through YC, right?
Yep. Only YC company I've invested in like 2 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty low volume on YC.
Yeah, no, and I think the amount of progress that they made and momentum, just purely in that batch in that 10 weeks was really incredible. And it was real customers, real customer. And it wasn't, I think we see nothing wrong with it of YC companies selling to other batchmates in YC. It's a great way to start, right? But
it was all outbound.
They were all outbound, tested out with real, true customers. The customers we talked to kind of came back like, I never heard of them. I didn't know what they were at all. And we knew it was a random YC company, but the product was just so good that we decided to put it into production, right? Throughout that batch. And the other part that I think I'll sort of highlight as already being a great example is there's no right way or wrong way to invest, right? Particularly early stage, right? I think there's GPs and investors that are like, I only want to back just the best founders. I don't care where they build it, right?
Yep.
And there's others where it's like I'm extremely thesis thematic driven, and I have very specific things I'm trying to look for, right? And we probably would say blend between the two, right? We describe ourselves, we are high conviction, low velocity. We are generalist investors, and we're thematically orientated, and we care about the intersection of what Mahdi kind of talked about, right? Where we want to find founders that do have strong opinions about the markets that they're building in, and have a strong opinion around what is the product that they want to try to build, or what's the hypothesis that they're actually testing, right? I would say the type of, never say never, right? But the type of founders that we're typically not necessarily looking to back are just an amazing hot company, and they're just gonna, they're just coming out to explore, right? Typically, that isn't our ICP of founder set that we're looking for, because we're not trying to build a large basket of kind of random seed bets and darts on the board and hope it works, right? We are backing specific founders in specific markets that we're interested and excited about, right? Sometimes it's us going out and finding the market and then finding the founders.
Yep.
Other times it can be the founder bring us into a market, bring us up to speed, and we get really excited about that, right? But we care about the intersection of all the above, and we want to back, and we believe believe that with our strategy, we want to be backing founders that have a strong opinion around, what is the path line to get to 100 million revenue and beyond, right? We think the best founders that we've ever got to work for did have a very, very strong opinion from the early days on one of the analogies I kind of like to give. It might be dated. I feel as though people don't know StarCraft as much anymore, but I used to play a lot of StarCraft as a kid. And then I got into competitive StarCraft. I wasn't that great, but got more into it right in high school and a little bit in college, right? And
that was exactly like me with Halo,
right?
Exactly. Yeah. Got really into it. Was I
was like fine,
not that good,
but I was like decent enough to get to gold, platinum, and it was okay, right? But within RTS games, there's this concept of micro and macro, right? Macro being you have to manage the overall end build of what is the end state of that you're trying to build with your with your race, what strategy you're trying to implement. But then there's a micro of like literally how are you moving your units and how do you sort of navigate through that, right? And we want to find I joke as like amazing StarCraft players, right? Where they can think about the macro of hey, like over the next 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years, this is where the market's going. This is where I think about the company. This is how I think about competitive landscape. This is what I want to build and why, right? And this is why I should exist. But then also can go down to the micro of like, this is how, like next week, this is the number one priority. This is what I'm going to build. This is the customer that I really care about, how I'm getting in front of them. And we want to find founders that are able to kind of balance both. And we find it's actually really hard to do both.
The only advantages any startup has over an incumbent, over a larger company, over a large company with a large team, but it's not their large priority, is for any startup, this is the number one priority. It's their internal conviction. It's their rate of speed in which they deliver value for customers. And that is the number one advantage. Artie's a perfect example of this. And if we can build and partner with a handful of teams every year that are concentrated in their ideas, their convictions, and their speed of delivery, and how fast they will ship great products, we would be tremendously happy. And that is the mission for us.
And is that kind of feels like some of this applies to like Pathlight, how you guys maybe think about things? You like how do you compete against the big guys, I guess? Like how do you differentiate early on? Because you talked about, I don't know if I necessarily agree. You're like, oh, seed, series A, like easy to compete, quote unquote. I think if you just read the blogs or you listen to like the standard advice, it's like super competitive per se. And maybe Artie's another case study where like when I invested, I was like, oh, damn, this is like really good. Like I would say, quote unquote, it was a hot round. And suddenly it's like, oh, you got like, I think you guys did a pretty big check. Like, did you guys lead the round technically?
Yeah. Like, we led the round. We often think about it as being quite simple. Most of the teams that we are excited to partner with, we are underwriting that with our both own conviction, delivering value very much upfront. And there's a strong chance we've already spent well ahead of meeting the team, a lot of time in the market, have introduced them to customers, and can provide a differentiated perspective on product around the go-to-market. And quite often we don't feel like we're really competing with other venture funds.
Really?
Most of the time, the competition is very simple of, is this a team that has enjoyed working with us already? Hopefully we've had enough lead time already to deliver value for them and ship products for them from our side. And if they feel that's the case, we can, and we're excited to work with them, obviously. We can figure out the what is that right combination on enabling us to be formal partners on the cap table. But our hope is by the time that conversation ever comes up, they already feel like we have been their best partner, day or night, every day of the week.
I think that I remember when I first started angel investing, there's this game that you can play of like getting into the hot company, right? Of getting into the logo, right? It's
fun,
right? It's fun, it's cool, right? I think there's a lot of
it's like the hot logo of the week.
And like you're in the scene, right? I think like one thing on angel investing that I talked to a lot of people that want to be angels. I asked them like, well, why do you actually want to be an angel, right? And I think that actually matters, right? If you want. I think there's a prestige also associated with being an angel investor. But the moment you're an angel investor, it's like, ooh, that's cool, right? And you can say the hot logos, all of a sudden now it's, I'm an angel investor in A, B, C, D, E company, right?
Yep.
And there's a whole game there.
It's like a school. It's like having a specific thing at the credential.
Yeah. It's like I call it angel investing. Sometimes it'd be like, it's like the Silicon Valley version of like golf, of like, it gets you into the country club, right? Of like, you're an angel investor now, and I'm going to share deals and venture gossip and that whole train, right?
Yep.
And I think that is one way to do investing, right? Where it's, oh hey, like Sequoia is chasing this deal and Andreessen's chasing this deal.
Like we got to got to
figure out how to get in and get in front of them and all that, right? And that's, if it's a space and a founder that we are incredibly excited about, we are more than happy to try and play that game, right? But more often that is not the game that we're trying to play, right?
Yeah, our game, so to speak, is very simple. And hopefully 10 to 20 years, have we been able to partner with incredible teams that have built incredible products that have scaled to 100 million and beyond. The more we do on that, and quite often in quite a few instances, a lot of the teams we work with, they're doing incredibly well. They never want to announce their round. They do not want to be on the Silicon Valley scene per se, nor do we in many instances. But their measure of success is the value they're delivering for customers. And so that's what we get excited for. If these were Pokemon cards, that's what we're excited to find and partner with. And hopefully one day they will be large public or private companies.
Yeah. And the other point too, I think what Mahdi made earlier, right? Like large funds getting large returns, like maybe go into that a little bit more around like how do we think about the thing that multi-stages and what's happening there versus why we've deliberately created, how we thought about our sort of fund construction, fund size, and why we kind of deliberately constrain that.
Because that's an interesting topic, because when you say a larger fund is incentivized for smaller outcomes, I would think they would need massive outcomes in order to return the fund.
So we find having both been at and invested alongside, been at companies backed and supported by some of the largest funds in the Valley and investing alongside many large funds, is quite often a relatively large fund will partner with a company as a call option. This is one investment amongst 50 that they will make in a given year. Time that you will get from a specific partner is likely not that much. Time you will get in terms of resources, even from a firm that might be 500 people, like some of our friends in the Valley, is still never going to be that much. And so that is a fundamentally different product where the only companies that may matter are for them are there's clear line of sight, can be $1 billion plus of revenue and outcome. And quite often, in a few instances, what we've observed and seen for ourselves is it's sometimes the investment is a vanity project for that specific partner. They have a vision for what they believe customers want. There are no interactions with customers themselves. Our philosophy is to be independently minded, spend a lot of our own time with customers, form our view of what is a set of products that customers might want, what is the value chain of pain for them, and how can you build a product and company and what the right team formulation might be. And so every team we partner with, it's very meaningful for us, for our LPs, to try to ensure that they do as well as possible. And we will spend an inordinate amount of time trying to help them to the extent that they want that help.
There's sometimes this eternal sort of trap of TAM, right? Of I think as funds have gotten larger and larger, right? If you're Sequoia Index Ribbit, right? You need to be in Stripe, right? And I think they are very good at trying to make sure that at some stage, right, they will get into the next Stripe. Right, they need to find companies that can deliver an exit at 10 billion plus of returns, right? To return a fund of that size, right? If we're in the next Stripe, we're extremely happy. We're super happy, right? But
our focus is help that founder go from that zero or maybe a few customers they have to get to 100 million in revenue, where they can choose their own path.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those companies will get hopefully very big and become the next Stripe. But also, if you want to be delivering $500 million in revenue, having thousands of customers, building a terrific company, and run it effectively on your own terms and just basically deliver large dividends, that's also a path to build a great company. Not that many companies should be public companies. Being a public company is mostly somewhat of a vanity project. But building a large, sustainable, durable company is that can truly endure for decades. Private markets are great for that, and so we're strongly supportive of the founder kind of picking their lane where they can be a self-sustaining business.
Yeah, and there's a lot of liquidity in the private markets too. Like the business gets to that point, and you can sell some shares. And return to your
as long as you didn't
LPs.
raise a stupid amount of money. Yes. Yeah.
In private markets, I think sometimes entrepreneurs, other investors may not realize that there are multiple routes to liquidity for yourself, for your employees, for your board. They can be selling shares secondary. They can be selling to private equity, and they can also be, let's just have large dividends and grow at a very sustainable rate and build terrific products for our customers. And so we are, our fund size enables us to be really happy and strongly supportive of all of those outcomes.
Yep.
So that's what we look to partner with founders on.
I've got about 3 more questions.
Right.
I think multiple people actually asked this one. I think Emily Mann specifically said, but I think maybe it was Jaron also brought this up too.
Okay.
Fund 2, big. It was a change. Like it was just a bigger fund. You're like going a little bit more institutional. You already talked about how you raised from some very like admirable LPs, and you also did it in like the worst time to raise a fund. Just talk through that. How did that go?
Raising with institutional LPs, we when we set out to go down that route, first of all, the reason to do it was we wanted 20-year partners that can be truly 20-year partners, the companies that we support. And so we can also support great nonprofit causes. The way that we thought about it was it's similar to building pipeline on a go-to-market team, which is there's a high degree of randomness, but there's a known universe of great hospitals, universities, who we'd be thrilled to partner with. And so we will go meet them and introduce what we're doing, and then run through basically that pipeline over the course of 6 to 9 months, and slowly over the course of time convert them. These are multi-decade relationships, and so they typically want to get to know you well in advance of you raising. And so we were excited to provide them that opportunity, and for us to also get to understand how they work, how they partner. And so we were both methodical and relentless in grinding through it, meeting LPs where they are, whether they be in the mountains in one instance in Switzerland, or in other instances in the great town of Pittsburgh, where some of our earliest supporters are. And where we are today is we have a couple of handfuls of terrific partners that we are excited to be partners with for the next 20 years and beyond.
We get a lot of emerging managers that sort of ask us for advice, right, around that. I think that we learned this around being able to ruthlessly qualify. Obviously be nice about it, right? But it's there were endowments where we talked to, and we probably could have been a lot more. I think we got a lot better towards the middle, towards the later end of like, hey, can you actually, what was the last emerging, like, how do you think about emerging managers? What's the smallest check size? What's your typical check size? What was the last emerging manager that you did? Right? I remember there was an LP that we talked to. I was like, oh, I love emerging managers. Like, okay, great. What was the last emerging manager you did? Well, we did, $100 million in Founders Fund. And I was like, well, think he's emerged. Yeah, over the last, I think it's a great, amazing fund.
That's a very generous description.
Yeah, that's a very generous description. And he's like, we do small check sizes, 100 million. Okay, we have very different definitions here, right?
Yeah.
And so really qualifying down to what our ICP of institutional investors and endowments that would actually seriously consider us as a product, a fund that they could actually invest in was really, really important, I think, as part of that exercise too.
Yeah, tactically, every meeting we did, we tried to ensure that we first were able to ask questions and better understand what is the profile of that LP. What is their exposure to venture? Are they, even within 2023, worst time periods, as you mentioned, to raise a venture fund? Are they looking to add a new venture manager? Are they looking to subtract a couple and then add a few newer managers that have opportunity to deliver true outperformance versus some of the mega funds? And so that was super helpful for us. And just the biggest limited resource we have, you have, and any founder has, is limited time. Yeah. And so we have to, as Charlie said, ruthlessly prioritize, and that was part of the process for us.
Yeah. And the other two things I'll probably add is making sure that your fund strategy, you actually have case studies and stories for that, right? Of, hey, we are co-leading rounds. These are the ownership targets that we're targeting for. I think if our fund one, we didn't have any of those proof points, it'd be much more difficult to actually build around that story, right?
So how big was the first fund?
The first fund was 48 million. Okay. And we were really focused on partnering with both best-in-class teams that will deliver terrific outcomes, with or without a financial downturn, technology downturn that had transpired over the last few years. And fund two, which is what we are investing out of now, is 75 million. And we changed the LP composition to be predominantly nonprofits, charitable organizations, and to continue to partner with those kind of best-in-class companies teams.
And so you said you built a case study. So with Fund 1, did you do a couple checks that were a little bit bigger that represented like the step up for the next fund? How did you make that transition?
It's we sometimes joke it's going from startup sales to mid-market enterprise sales. Mm-hmm. And we had a similar progression from ownership and from how we continue to add deeper concentration throughout the course of Fund 1 and continue to do in Fund 2. And so we had those case studies, and the good thing was many of the teams that we had partnered with, we were fortunate that they continued to perform exceptionally well, despite the market downturn. And so hopefully, knock on wood, they will continue to perform exceptionally well and deliver great outcomes for our partners.
Yeah, but I would say Artie's a great example, right? I think early on in the fund, we were graduating as sort of angels, right? I think we were very proud to be first check, high conviction angels. And more often, the motion as angels would be we would invest in the company, and we bring in other investors and kind of help them get to conviction to lead that route, right? Yeah. So for Fund 1, it's okay, great. We're transitioning from that to, that we're going to be a first check, and we are going to be the ones kind of leading or co-leading the round and bringing together in the right cohort group there, right? And being able to show proof points with founders and actually have, I think the part that surprised me and maybe shouldn't have surprised me was the amount of referencing that happened as part of the fundraise. It was the most referenced I've ever been in my life across any founder that's worked with me, worked for me, that I backed, any GP or investor that LP knew. A lot of it is, okay, what's the story of the product, of the fund, of the firm? And then the LP side they'll do a ton of work to actually validate that it all lines up, right? Hey, you said that this founder would have picked you because of XYZ reason. We want to go talk to that founder. And would that founder tell you, hey, if Mahdi and Charlie had a fund, they would have been the first person in lead to actually go and lead that round? Yes, no, or hey, they actually did lead the round, right? And so I think case studies like that are really important to just think about and be able to show proof points on executing the strategy.
And then how did you transition in terms of the way you put together the portfolio and the fund? Was it pretty similar? It sounds like you got a little bit more concentrated with Fund 2.
We've gotten more concentrated. The way we typically think about it is we would prefer to make a handful of partnerships every year and be concentrated in the time that we're devoting to every team and try to be as supportive. There are always a lot of founders that we're incredibly excited for. And so we always try to be helpful to folks no matter what, as our default as well.
Yep. And I think from the fund perspective, our goal is to keep it simple, right? We're not planning to build out a platform team and hire but like an army of analysts and associates. It's we're equal GP partnership. We like to keep the team small and focused. The product to the founders is you work directly with the team, right? The IC process is us and the team, right? And you work directly with everyone across the team. And when we make an investment from Pathlight, it's all of us making the investment, and we're all doing everything we possibly can to support that founder, that journey, and just keep things like really, really simple as much as possible, and to deliver great returns for our LPs.
A little bit of a different question. We probably should hit on it earlier, but I want to make sure we ask it. Question from Ashe at Haystack. He said, what is your opinion on doing seed rounds? Like we'll just say a seed 1, and then there's these things called seed extensions or seed 2. Like how do you guys think through that? Are they good ideas, or what do you think?
We always think about it as kind of two elements. One, on that journey to 100 million and beyond, which we just use as a milestone and framework of, is it going to be a meaningful, self-sustainable business and have multiple paths for its journey thereafter? Where are we in we have high confidence versus there are a lot of questions and leaps of faith. The second element of it is whether it's a pre-seed, seed 1, seed 5, Series A, our goal is to always independently underwrite it based off of what we understand about that market, that team, that product, what we hear from customers, what we think is the opportunity for what they could become from today. And so quite often we don't really pay attention to what is the round structure. Is this a seed extension?
Yeah, bridge round uses bad connotation.
There have been actually
Alloy is a great example.
Alloy, Robinhood, Plaid, nearly all the companies we helped to build that are large, successful companies today were not popular at the seed round, or probably not even popular at the Series A round. In most cases, they didn't have, besides the term sheets that they accepted, they didn't have other competing term sheets. There are companies like Figma, like Notion, that were late bloomers. And so in all of these situations, and what we often find is there is a consensus in the valley in many instances, and then there's what customers are saying and what ultimately really customers are doing. And we care much more about what customers are saying and doing than what perhaps other investors might think today. We do care what if our thesis and what the founder and the company are building, that proves to be correct. Is this going to be the company that hopefully all of our peers have regretted passing on?
Yep.
Because you do most likely need additional capital and the venture community to support you downstream.
Yeah, I would say the way we kind of think about it is like at early stage, the alpha is trying to find there's going to be something non-consensus about the team, the market, the founder, something, right? If everyone's chasing that company, that deal, it's consensus. Some of those will be great, right?
They'll be priced appropriately.
They'll be priced appropriately or very inappropriately.
Or competition.
Or completely bonkers, right?
Inappropriately.
Inappropriately priced maybe actually is the better boat.
But to be fair, one thing that is also non-consensus is pricing, right?
Yes.
Which is if you truly believe that market, that team, that product can be a much larger outcome with lower risk than other folks in the valley.
Yeah,
pricing is one way to be non-consensus.
It's a great lever. Yep.
And you can pull that lever and show your conviction.
Yep.
And you can't do that on every deal because that goes quickly from we have a non-consensus portfolio that has asymmetric upside to we have a portfolio instead of partnerships where we have a lot of downside exposure. Yeah. So just thinking about the risk of the portfolio and the teams that you're working with.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, I think as much as possible, we want to go to first principles, right? I feel as though the common VC debate's always around like, how do you think about pricing? And I don't want to price here. How do you think about competition or whatever? And it's like, hey, if we think that what the founders built in and we're really excited about the market and they built something amazing and we have high conviction, like we will pay up on price, right? That is a lever that we have in our toolkit to pull, right? But there needs to be a rational reason, right? I think that what we saw in the last 5-6 years, and I'd argue a lot that's happening in the AI side, right? I think a lot of that quote unquote discipline, right? Price discipline doesn't mean I'm being really cheap on price, right? I think price discipline means that you are paying, or there's rationale as to how you think about the return and the ROI of that investment, the risk reward, and you're being disciplined in your approach and philosophy around that and consistent around that. And I think we think about that a lot with our investments.
And when you find that right blend of all of the characteristics that you're looking for, do you ultimately take the swing?
Yeah.
And hopefully you win in building that partnership with that team. Matters just as much. And so we try to focus on all parts of the kind of value chain of being a venture fund.
Yeah, I think, and speaking about Artie again specifically, the YC is usually just like slightly more expensive on average than like the average seed round. Mm-hmm. And that was one where, we already talked about it, but it was like really good. And then just like the price was like a little bit high. It was higher than I usually do because it was, YC. I'm usually just a little bit below that. But it was a time where I was like, if the only reason you're not investing is because like the valuation is just a little bit higher, that's a pretty bad reason. If that's the only reason, as long as it's still reasonable.
Yeah. So there's I think two elements of pricing. There's the entry pricing, which is what we are investing in today, and what the founders are willing to effectively give up part of their business to allow someone to partner with them. And then there's what is the ultimate 5, 10, 15 years from now when that business will exit. Could be public, could be a strategic exit. What is that? And we try to think about it in the frame of, is there a real opportunity for this kind of tail outcome for 100x exit that we feel reasonably confident in based off the work we've done on the product, on the customers, on the team. Mm-hmm. If, again, that holds to be true, we're more open-minded on pricing. Mm-hmm. If we feel that we're paying a crazy price for maybe a terrific team, but they've not shown enough evidence, and the return, even if everything goes right, is just not going to be there to justify the risk, we will respectfully bow out, but be as supportive as we can of that team, while understanding we are not investors.
Yeah, and we'll miss some, and that's just the nature of the world. Yeah,
makes sense. And then, so one last question for Mahdi. You have some, public market investing that you do. What are your thoughts on the public market right now?
We think about it as there's a short term and there's a long term. In the short term, over the next 6 months, there will be some choppy days coming up ahead. Inevitably, the Fed will likely lower rates. Question is just which day, and how will that be perceived by the market before and after. The election season will come and go. And most likely, I would say the outcome there is there's always going to be some form of stalemate between the executive office, judicial branches, which are rightward leaning today, and then the legislative branches, where there will be some form of stalemate. And then on the back end of the year, we will likely see a couple of elements from labor coming back into play. And at least my perspective is the job market this summer was just somewhat artificially deflated, partially because of the temperature is really high. People are just not looking to work outside.
Really? You think that's what it was?
There is, I think, more of an element there than perhaps people expect. This is, and we feel like we've been saying this for multiple years now.
It was super hot in New York today, this week.
And today was actually pretty good. Comparatively to the rest of the summer was crazy. Yeah.
And
the rest of the country.
And in the Northeast and multiple parts of the U.S., it is unadvisable for you to frankly work outside, and there are many folks who are frontline workers, and so that has to some degree perhaps artificially deflated jobs, applications, and the willingness of folks to want to work in those conditions, and perhaps rightfully so. And so my 50-50 assumption, if I were a betting man, and we all are in some degree, is we will see jobs continue their steady pace, inflation come down a bit, and the markets will continue to perhaps correct from where they were earlier in the year. But we are seeing profitability across the board generally increase, particularly for technology companies as they focused on earnings. I think a couple of sub-elements that will also be interesting is consumer goods, earnings, and profitability margins should go down a bit. In many instances, margins were artificially increased by just increasing pricing until customers could no longer
broke.
until they broke. I love fast food and ordering from McDonald's and Domino's, and at some point the price was really high. And so my expectation is for maybe the first time in a while, we will see some price reset there. And particularly also on the rental market and mortgages. So these are all, my perspective is the fundamental U.S. economy, not speaking for the global economy in different geographies, is actually quite durable, quite strong today in the short term. And in the long term, we still have these secular elements of AI where, at least internally, we continue to be excited that there are real use cases where there's measurable ROI for the end customer. And companies being built to drive that will continue to compound from what are likely small numbers today to large numbers. And we think that'll have a meaningful impact on labor productivity, on increasing profitability in a number of areas. The question is, how will that flow through the rest of the economy? And then there are two other massive secular changes. One is falling birth rates, which today doesn't feel like a real issue and is perhaps in the far reaches of many people's minds.
It's hard to grasp how that cascades over time.
Well, the crux or intersection of that will also be on the macro side with baby boomers who today are retiring, but you'll start to maybe see a decline in just the number of baby boomers starting on the tail end of the next 10 years. And so you have falling fertility rate, a somewhat increasing elderly that'll start to slightly decrease in 10 years. And that'll have unusual gyrations in healthcare spending there. And then where the metal will meet the road is also, it's no surprise to anyone, again, the far reaches of most of our minds is the U.S. debt is very high. The annual deficit is very high. And today, roughly 60+% of our personal income taxes are used to pay off just the interest rate on that U.S. debt. That will likely, no matter what you, I, or anyone else loves, will likely mean increased personal or corporate taxes on the tail end of the next 10 years. That's at least my expectation. Or there will be just a fundamental devaluing of the U.S. currency. So there are these kind of unusual things happening that today feel like maybe we know on the recesses of all of our minds, but that should come to a crux of the next decade. So what does that mean for public markets? On balance, I am in particular areas still an optimist and have been buying. This is not investment advice.
This is not investment advice. Do not follow this. Yes, at all.
There's a disclosure.
Yes.
Yeah, just don't. Yeah.
But continue to be optimistic about CrowdStrike and opportunities for them to hopefully recapture their lost trust with customers.
Yeah, CrowdStrike was the one that went down, like took the economy down.
Yeah, well, it took down the economy, and I would say my pie in the sky estimate is likely affected somewhere between 30 to 50 billion of global GDP in a single, at least 24-hour day, which is in some ways, for better or worse, impressive.
That's an important company.
Very, very important company, and I'm sure there will be a double sourcing of sorts on endpoint EDR management, but CrowdStrike will continue to likely compound, and I suspect will look like perhaps a great value play over if we were to look at it from a hindsight basis in a couple of years. And then in other parts of the market, continue to be a big fan of Datadog. And HubSpot, where they will continue to deliver value. The one thing for HubSpot is SMB weakness is a little bit more of an issue in the short term, but over the long term will continue to compound. as they've built a generational multi-product suite. In all of these areas, we have funded and will continue to fund private market competitors, but we respect great software businesses. And then perhaps the last one is ServiceNow is an unusual anomaly in software today, where every quarter they report earnings, they say, hey, AI is working great for us. It is working great for our customers. Our earnings are better than we expected. They are an anomaly because you do not hear that in the application layer from other public companies and from perhaps many private ones. And if you look at the root core of ServiceNow's product, it is a ticketing platform for internal teams. They are aggregating effectively demand for what people internally want to be done by other teams. Many of those tasks could be legal, could be IT, could be security, are things that perhaps can be auto-remediated, creating tremendous ROI and allowing ServiceNow to capture more of that opportunity. So ServiceNow continues to be at least a mainstay in my personal portfolio. We do not today have a ServiceNow competitor in our Fund 1 or Fund 2.
But if you are building or thinking about building that, please reach out to us. We'd be very excited to chat about that.
And perhaps the last thing, what is a private company I wish I could invest in is Epic, the EHR provider.
EHR, yeah. It's like notoriously people hate that, don't they? Like VCs say it's a terrible product.
I would say VCs tend to say it's a terrible product, but many doctors would probably say, including my wife, who's a physician, that it is a pretty good product, actually. Much better than most
of the job done.
Gets the job done. It is not the best UI, but it gets the job done, and it is led by actually a multi-generational founder, Judith Faulkner, who will likely outlast most of us in venture, who is 75 plus years old and will never give up that business. And so I would rather most of the venture market focuses on other parts of healthcare which need help, whether they're on patient intake management, revenue cycle management, or actually taking out EHRs that just don't work, like Cerner, which affects veteran affairs and other parts of the economy. So perhaps more of a broader macro and public markets take than
that was a full on report. I mean, that was like I feel like I'm an expert now. I'm gonna have to go back and re-listen a couple times to like dissect it all. That was great. Charlie, anything you want to end with?
No, I just dollar cost average into the market, so I'm pretty vanilla here.
Yeah.
But no, I actually the part that I really I think why it makes me really complimentary too is that we actually do believe that having a deep understanding of what's happening in the public markets actually does have a flow down impact into the private markets, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And yeah, it could be many years out, right? But that is something that that there is a lot of I think. We tell actually even analysts there's a lot of alpha in reading 10Ks, right? It's crazy the amount of information that these incumbent businesses will just literally list out. Here are the risks. Here's what we're concerned about. Here are the competitive threats, right? And like they have to report that. And so we actually really enjoy spending our time. I think it informs a lot of quite a bit of our perspective also on the private markets too.
Yeah, and then to Mahdi's point earlier about how understanding with pricing what the outcome looks like. If you understand what the public markets or a developed company is going to be valued at, it's a little bit easier when you think about startups. What's the entry point you need to look like? So,
yep. But even public markets, maybe perhaps a story for a different day.
Yeah.
Have their issues, perhaps in how they value companies.
Yep.
And how they think about what is long-term and durable.
That's fair. Any way you want to expand on that?
Oh boy. That could be another hour, I think.
Yeah.
Well, we've already gone for almost 2.5.
That could be another hour. That could be another minute. We might do the next one. If we could bring Mahdi back on the podcast again, I think we think it was a pretty good experience. Maybe that'll be the next one.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, it was great to chat. Thanks for coming on. Hopefully you guys had a good time.
It was great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. First, then we'll see if it's the last podcast I do.
Maybe you'll come on again in 2 years. We'll talk about all the more public market stuff.
We'll see how CrashRite's doing.
Yeah, we'll see how CrowdStrike is doing. And hopefully it doesn't. I was supposed to go to a wedding actually, and CrowdStrike prevented me from making my flight. So
Wow.
Despite that,
You're still a shareholder.
I am not just a shareholder.
If anything, he was like, "That's a pure buy." Yeah, yeah. Disrupted my flight. The impact there. Buy.
Yeah.
Buying more.
Love it.
Not financial advice.
Not financial advice. And we hopefully are not Jim Cramer.
All right. With that, thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. Make sure to check out the show notes if you want to go deeper on some of the topics mentioned throughout the conversation. If you like this episode, it would mean the world if you liked, subscribed, commented, followed, and shared it with a friend who can learn from it. And if you don't want to miss future episodes, subscribe to my newsletter, The Split, in the show notes, and you'll get links plus a transcript for every new episode emailed directly to your inbox. Thanks again for listening. See you in the next episode.
Hey everyone, Eric here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at ericaturpentine.co. That's ERIK at turpentine.co, and let's partner together.